If you're here because you can't sleep again, then welcome. You've found the silent history where sleep comes not from silence, but from stories soft enough to carry you there. Maybe you weren't looking for history tonight. Maybe just quiet. Either way, you're home now. There's a chill in the air tonight. Somewhere, a candle sputters. You might be lying in your bed, or in a place that's trying to be a bed. And there's something old in the silence, something older than sleep, the kind of hush that presses in like stone. Your breath would have frozen before morning, before the story wanders too far. If this kind of slow, quiet ramble helps the night pass softer, feel free to like or subscribe. Only if you'd come back for another one. And if you're still awake, tell me where you're listening from and what time the world is for you right now. I read everyone, even the quiet ones. Now let the lights dim. Let the hush settle in the corners of your room. You don't need to keep up. Just rest. This is the silent history, and you're already inside it. You wake before light, not because you want to, not because anything stirs you gently, but because hunger presses its fingers against the inside of your ribs, like it's knocking from within. There's a soreness in your belly that doesn't go away with shifting positions. It just waits. It waits for you to remember that you didn't eat yesterday, or the day before. Really, not properly, not enough. Outside, the Roman slums insulae. They call them groan in their own way, not with voices but with the settling of wet wood and the slow creak of stone warmed only by bodies. The air smells like mold, soot, and old grain, the kind that's been stored too long in a basket woven with lies. The mattress beneath you is nothing more than flattened straw tied into a shape, and the shape doesn't hold much warmth. There's a hole in the wall where a tile fell out weeks ago. You meant to fix it. But then the rain came, and the rats, and life rolled forward like a crooked wheel that you couldn't quite stop. The floor is cold. You know it will be, but still, your feet find it, because waiting in the straw won't fill your stomach, and neither will dreams. Your toes curl against the stone, and so begins the daily ritual of trying to eat without food. You rummage quietly, carefully. You don't want to wake the others. They're not really your family. Not all of them, but in this place, everyone sleeping in the same room becomes something like blood. And hunger shared is hunger halved, or at least postponed. In the corner, beneath a broken amphora you've turned into a makeshift cupboard, is the food, or what's left of it. 3 kernels of barley, half a handful of cracked millet, a scrap of cloth with olive oil stains so faint they look like memories. No bread. Not yet. Maybe later, if fortune turns her face. You don't take the barley, you count it, then leave it, because counting, in a world like this, is sometimes more comforting than spending. Instead, you chew the inside of your cheek. Let the metallic taste bloom for a moment, just so your body believes something has arrived. And then you go out. The stairs down the insula are slick with cold. They were built for many, but maintained by no one. Tenements 5 stories high, packed like stacked promises, each floor more dangerous than the one below. You walk lightly, remembering where the wood is weakest. A boy fell last week. He screamed the whole way down, not because of the pain, but because he knew his mother wouldn't be able to fix him when he landed. You reach the bottom. The light outside is a bruise-colored smear on the horizon. Rome doesn't wake gently. It rumbles, groans, hiccups smoke and shouts. And somewhere out there, before the baker's fire is even lit, you have to find a way to feed yourself, or at the very least, to pretend to. There's a man at the corner who sells yesterday's ashes for a coin. Not bread, not flour, just ashes. He He says it thickens stew, gives the illusion of meat. You've bought from him before. You've lied to yourself before. But today you pass him. You're not even sure where you're going, but your feet seem to. The grain district is too far. And besides, they've raised prices again. A modius of wheat costs more than what you make in a week, if you made anything, and that was before the taxes, before the fire in Subura last month, before the rain swallowed your last coin pouch in the gutter near the forum. You walk past the butcher's stall. It smells rich, thick, the scent of fat and blood and salt. But the dog there is bigger than you and meaner, and the butcher doesn't like anyone looking like you, threadbare, hungry-eyed, hopeful. Hope here is a sin, a temptation punishable by laughter or a swift kick. You find a shadow to sit in. The alley behind the bakery is warm, faintly. The ovens are still cooling from the night before. You press your back to the brick. Close your eyes. Imagine bread. Not fresh bread. You've never had that, but something edible. The kind of bread that doesn't crumble into dust when you look at it. Bread that doesn't have to be soaked in vinegar wine just to stay in your mouth. Bread that doesn't leave your gums bleeding. You'd call it a dream, but dreams don't have to be chewed. The baker's boy emerges just as the sun stretches its first golden limb across the rooftops. He doesn't see you at first, or maybe he pretends not to. He tosses something into the pile of cracked pots by the wall, a heel of something, charred and rock-like. When he's gone, you move. You pick it up. It's hard enough to bruise your fingers, but it smells like heat, like the memory of grain, like something once alive. You hold it to your mouth. It scrapes your lip, breaks against your teeth like stone. You chew anyway, slowly, deliberately. Not for flavor, there is none. Not for texture, it's more splinter than sponge. But you chew because your body insists on trying, and because some mornings, even bad bread is holy. Some silences are full of hunger. Not the loud, growling kind, but the quiet sort, the kind that nestles behind your ribs and waits for you to forget it's there, until it isn't. You finish the crust. Your jaw aches, but your stomach is no longer a scream, only a whisper. You lean your head back against the brick and let the warmth soak through. Someone passes, mumbling a prayer to Mercury. Another spits and coughs, dragging a cart of old rags behind them. You watch, not really seeing, just waiting. For what? You don't know. Maybe the next crust, maybe the next day, maybe nothing. Because in ancient Rome, the poor didn't eat to live, they ate to delay dying. And the line between the two was thinner than even the baker's pity. You don't call it breakfast, no one does. There's a word for the first food you find each day, but it isn't wrapped in comfort or ritual. It doesn't come with warmth or choice, or even the sense that morning has properly arrived. It comes when your jaw remembers how to move again, when your fingers stop shaking just enough to lift the thing, when someone tosses a crust over their shoulder like trash, and you happen to be walking behind them. What lands in your palm is blackened and stiff panis siligineus, or at least something pretending to be it, a civilian's word for bread. Though what you're holding no longer belongs to that category in any noble sense. It is hard, dense, and dry enough to draw blood from your gum line if you bite wrong. It's been burnt twice, once in the oven, and again in the sun. And yet, it is food. At least that's the hope, the illusion, the necessity. So you do what everyone, like you does, you soak it. Not in milk, because milk is a word for other people. Not in fresh water, because Rome's water isn't always water, and what flows from fountains may carry more rust than relief. No, you soak it in vinegar wine posca. They call it the drink of soldiers and slaves alike. Sour, thin, reddish, like someone remembered grapes existed. It softens the crust just enough to fool your teeth. And with that single motion, the dipping, the pressing, the bite, the day begins. Not with light, not with songbirds, but with the sound of your own chewing, slow and brittle, against a backdrop of shouting vendors and clattering carts. The streets are already swollen with the foot traffic of survival, sandals scraping stone, worn soles catching in cracks. You know this rhythm. You've walked it too many times to count, and never with purpose, only with need. To the outside eye, it might look like you're wandering, but to the poor in Rome, wandering is a job. You trace invisible circuits through the city, from the baker's ash heap to the alley behind the butcher's stall, to the temple steps where the doves roost and sometimes drop seeds. If you're fast, every movement is an audition for fortune. Every pause, a bet that someone else's waste might become your meal. You pass children your age chewing on dried chickpeas they've stolen from sacks. You nod to an old woman who eats onions like apples raw, weeping and proud. You avoid the eyes of a man with no tunic and no teeth, tearing at a loaf with a rock as though he might win. Everyone is performing a kind of grace, the grace of pretending this is normal, that the blackened crust is not just tolerable, but desirable, that the blood on your lip after the first bite is nothing more than a signal that you've begun. Bread in ancient Rome was not one thing, it was many. And for the poor, it was a spectrum of compromise. The finest white loaves made from sifted wheat flour. Light and soft were reserved for the rich, those with silver plates and house slaves and wives who wore perfume to dinner. Those loaves barely needed chewing. They dissolved in the mouth like clouds. You saw one once, dropped in the dirt during a funeral procession. It looked too soft to exist in your world. A child picked it up. A dog took it from the child. The dog was beaten by a guard. The bread remained untouched, somehow too sacred after that exchange to be touched again. The poor, by contrast, ate bread with color, dark, coarse, brown or gray, bread that remembered the husk, bread with pebbles in it, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, stones ground into flour by millers in a rush, or by careless hands hoping to stretch supply. You've bitten those pebbles before. You felt the crack of your own molar and known immediately not just pain, but cost. A broken tooth means infection. Infection means fever, and fever means either debt or death, whichever finds you first. Historians still debate whether these coarse breads were a product of Roman ingenuity, stretching every last seed, or simply the clearest proof of indifference toward the lower classes. Either way, the bread told a truth: you were not meant to thrive. You were meant to endure. You once watched a man bake in the open, not in a shop, but beside a collapsed shrine, with nothing but a fire pit and a flat slab of stone. His hands were calloused, dusted white. He had flour, yes, but the kind that came from emmer, an older grain, low in gluten and coarse in texture. He mixed it with water from a jug that reeked of brass and thyme. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just kneaded in silence. You watched every movement like prayer. When the first round of dough went flat and hot on the stone, the smell reached you in seconds. Smoky, yeasty, sharp. It clung to your throat. You didn't ask for a piece. You didn't dare. But when he noticed you just once, he tore off a sliver, a burnt edge, a breath of a crust. You ate it like it was your last name. That day, you walked lighter. Not because you were full, you weren't, but because you had tasted something made by human hands, not thrown away, not stolen, not begged for, just offered. That sliver carried you for days. Some people say Roman bread was dull, that it lacked seasoning, that it was often dry. And yes, all of that is true. But dullness is not the absence of story. It's the silence between bites. You sit on a stone step now, outside a crumbling taberna that sells only smoke and insults this early in the day. You chew the last of your crust, the vinegar wine stinging where your lips split earlier. A group of boys pass by with bags of flour slung over their shoulders, not theirs, of course. They carry it for a fee, or for the promise of a pinch once the delivery is done. One of them drops a trail of flour behind him without noticing. You don't follow. That would be too obvious. Instead, you let the wind scatter it, like dreams, like dignity. You've known people who tried to bake their own bread from nothing. Ground chickpeas, crushed chestnuts, even dust from old straw, soaked and pressed and dried again, until it formed a shape that could technically be bitten. These aren't recipes. They're rituals, acts of resistance against the truth that you weren't meant to have what others eat with such ease. Bread, for the poor, was not sustenance alone. It was currency. It was comfort. It was cruelty in edible form. If you had bread, you had leverage. If you had 2 loaves, you had luck. And if you had bread, warm from an oven, unbroken, with no bite yet taken then for a moment, however brief, you were safe. Maybe not full, but safe. And maybe safety is the closest you get to peace in a body that's always a little bit empty. Not every silence is empty. Some are full of things we weren't allowed to say. You don't talk about how the crust hurts your teeth. You don't complain about the mold. You don't wonder aloud whether the baker even remembers your face. You eat, and if someone offers you a second crust, you say thank you, not with words, but with both hands. Because when bread is hard enough to cut you, it also teaches you how to soften. There's no fire yet, just the memory of heat lingering beneath yesterday's coals. You crouch beside the small, cracked clay stove near the rear of your insula, where the communal hearth waits, like a mouth that hasn't spoken since nightfall. The fire's gone out. Of course, it always does. There is never enough wood, and what passes for fuel now is a mixture of olive pits, broken roof tiles, and the occasional pinch of resin scraped from discarded amphorae. You learn to make do. You learn not to expect flame, only smoke. And even smoke is a gift. The pot is still there, the same one you share with 2 neighbors, though no one calls them that out loud. Names are dangerous. If someone disappears, it's easier not to miss them if you never knew what to call them in the first place. You lift the lid and peer inside. A thin crust of yesterday's pulse clings to the sides, hardened like plaster. You scrape some off with your fingernail. It flakes into your palm like dust and disappointment. But this is what you came for. Pulse, grain boiled with water, thickened into something that pretends to be food. Not porridge, not soup, not quite anything. But it fills the belly with a slow weight, and sometimes that is all you need from a meal. Not satisfaction, just silence where the hunger used to be. Today, you try to make more. Not because you expect it to taste better, or even taste at all, but because this morning has already grown teeth, and the ache inside you is sharpening fast. You gather the ingredients with slow, steady hands, not because you're calm, but because haste gets you nothing in this world but spilled rations and broken hope. You measure out a scoop of millet, a modest scoop, not enough for fullness, but enough to soften the edge of being awake. A handful of water from a cracked jug follows. You light what's left of last night's coals, coaxing life from them with breath you can't afford to waste. The pot hisses softly. It's the only sound besides the distant murmur of Rome's waking heartbeat, the sweep of feet against stone, the soft thud of carts, the calls of merchants rehearsing their lies for another day. You stir. Boiling is not an act of abundance here. It's not a prelude to flavor or the first step in a culinary dance. It's a quiet desperation, an attempt to transform what little you have into something less sharp, less dry, less difficult to swallow. And boiling is not guaranteed. Firewood is rationed. Access to flame, a luxury. Every time you boil, you burn something else. A sliver of roof, a splinter of furniture, a threadbare curtain long past warmth. Sometimes you wonder if fire is really for food at all, or just for hope. The pulse thickens, slowly, a sludge of patience and heat. You stir with the same stick you used yesterday, flat at the end now, where the grain has worn it smooth. There's no salt, no oil, not today, not unless someone's dropped a coin. You glance around. No one is watching. Still, you stir as though they are, because the act is sacred, because there's dignity in pretending to cook, even when the outcome is always the same. In wealthier homes, pulse might be seasoned with herbs, parsley, coriander, even a splash of garum if the cook is feeling generous. Some families thicken it with goat's cheese or crack an egg into the pot to add richness. They speak of pulse as nourishment, as tradition, as history in a bowl. But here, it's barely even called by name. It's not a dish, it's an apology. Still, you remember your grandmother making it with reverence, even when there was nothing in the pot but water and crushed barley. She stirred like she was summoning something bigger than hunger. She would hum, soft and tuneless, as though the sound alone might give the food a little more heart. That hum echoes in you now, not in your throat, but in your memory, soft, steady, as your wrist turns again and again through the thickening mix. You ladle a spoonful into a clay bowl, chipped at the edge. You blow on it. It steams faintly, like the breath of someone afraid to speak. Then you eat. The first mouthful is always the hardest, not because of the taste, but because it reminds you how far away taste truly is. It's warm, at least. It slides down with a quiet resistance, like swallowing mud. It coats your teeth. It leaves a slickness on your tongue that doesn't quite feel like food. But it stays. It settles. And that, for now, is enough. You finish slowly, not because you are savoring, but because finishing quickly means you'll be hungry again too soon. Others arrive, like shadows peeling themselves from the edges of the alleyway. You don't speak. They don't ask. You hand the pot off without words, and someone else begins to stir what remains. There's a rhythm in it, a kind of communion. And maybe that's all this is, a ritual of persistence, a ceremony of staying alive. Historians still debate whether pulse was truly a staple of the poor or merely a symbolic dish, referenced more in text than in kitchens. But for you, there's nothing symbolic about it. It is the gray line between mourning and starvation. It is the thing you carry in your gut when everything else has been taken. Once, you heard someone say that Rome was built on grain. They meant politics, trade, empire, power. You know better. Rome was built on what people did with the crumbs, how they shared them, how they stretched them, how they swallowed shame alongside millet and called it breakfast. And it's in those moments, bent over a pot, watching steam rise like a prayer without a god, that you understand what Rome really tastes like. It doesn't taste like honeyed dormice or stuffed dates or roasted peacock. It tastes like compromise. You sit for a while after eating, back against the wall, hands curled around the empty bowl. The warmth lingers a little longer than the food itself. You let it. The day will ask more of you. Soon errands, bartering, scavenging. But for now, there is stillness. A child nearby spills a scoop of lentils. No one scolds her. Everyone simply watches them roll across the stones like marbles too precious to chase. And somehow, The silence that follows feels full. You think of all the pots in all the tenements, all across the slums of Subura and beyond. Hundreds, maybe thousands, boiling in tandem. The same sound, the same scent, the same slow choreography of hunger and heat. It binds you to them, even if you'll never learn their names. Even if they vanish tomorrow. You've seen it happen before. A woman who boiled grain for 12 years vanished in one night, leaving only the charred rim of her pot behind. A boy who stirred with a wooden spoon shaped like a flute was found sleeping in the forum, never woke up. The world kept boiling without them, but the memory remains. Some mornings feel like trying to light a fire with wet straw. You do everything right, but the spark doesn't catch. Today, it caught. Today, you ate. That is all the victory you are allowed. The pot sits empty now, cooling in the shadows. You leave it where it is. Someone else will rinse it. Or not. Maybe the rain will do it for you. Maybe not even that. You rise, knees stiff. The chill is back. The city is louder now, more awake than you want it to be, but you walk into it anyway. Not because you're ready, but because you must. And as you move, you carry the weight of pulse in your stomach like a tiny anchor. It keeps you from floating away, keeps your feet on stone, keeps you within the rhythm of Roman life, the silent, steaming truth of survival. You were never promised more than this, but still, you stir, you eat, you go on. If your eyelids are heavy, that's all right. You remember the first time someone handed you an olive without laughing? It wasn't much. It wasn't even fresh. A small, wrinkled thing pulled from the bottom of a cracked terracotta jar, floating in murky brine that smelled of salt and age and the sharp bite of time gone bad. The man who gave it to you was missing half his teeth and had breath like boiled cabbage, but he didn't look at you like you were begging. He looked at you like he understood. You didn't say thank you, because the olive was small and because words felt too big for the moment, but you held it in your mouth for a long time before biting, waiting until your body quieted, waiting until you could pretend that it might taste like something other than necessity. It didn't. It tasted like salt and bitterness and the faint ghost of what might once have been oil. Still, you swallowed, and something about that made the world bearable for the rest of the afternoon. In the Roman slums, fermented olives are less a delicacy and more a punctuation mark in a sentence that never quite ends. They arrive when someone else can't finish theirs, or when a merchant discards a barrel gone too sour for the wealthy to stomach. They are not selected. They are not paired with cheese. They are not displayed in decorative bowls. They are found, taken, shared, sometimes even fought over. You chew them not for pleasure, but for presence, for the calories, for the salt that keeps you standing one more hour, and yes, for the texture rubbery, dense, slightly slippery, because even that is better than chewing on thoughts too long. Today, the same old stall reappears near the edge of the forum, with jars leaning slightly on makeshift planks and a tarp overhead that threatens to collapse every time the wind groans. You know the man who tends it. He used to grow his own olives in the hills outside Rome, but the last drought burned his grove, and now he trades in the things no one else wants: the forgotten jars, the cracked ones, the batches that have gone too far past sour and begun to taste of something almost chemical. He doesn't speak when you approach. He lifts the lid of a clay pot, nods toward the brine, and waits. You reach in slowly, letting your fingers hesitate just long enough to feel the cold sting of the liquid bite your skin. You pull out 3 olives. One has collapsed on itself. The other 2 still hold shape. He doesn't ask for coin. He knows better than to insult the ritual. You eat one as you walk. The brine clings to your lip like dried blood. The pit is small, bitter. You hold it in your teeth before spitting it into the gutter. This is not a meal. This is not even a snack. But it is something. And sometimes, when the days stretch like string pulled too thin, even that feels like more than it is. The olive was once a symbol of peace, they say, but in your hands, it is a symbol of repetition. The taste doesn't change. The shape doesn't surprise. It returns again and again like an old thought you can't shake. The bitterness lives in the back of your throat for hours. You sip water to chase it. The water fails. You drink posca instead. It burns worse, but masks the rot. Rot? That's what you think about most these days. How food doesn't need to be fresh to be eaten. How the poor have learned to digest what others wouldn't even touch. How the brine that preserves can also deceive, covering the sour, hiding the mold, making you believe something is edible when it's only barely survived decay. Historians still debate whether the brined olives sold to the poor were leftovers from the upper classes or made specifically to be sold as poor man's fruit. Some say it was a market solution, Rome's way of feeding its lowest without feeding them well. Others claim it was charity disguised as commerce. But when your stomach turns from the third olive, you don't wonder what the historians would say. You only wonder if tomorrow's batch will burn less. There's a wall along the river, near the old bridge, where the salt sellers used to sit with their baskets of dried fish and jars of preserved greens. You remember standing there once as a boy, listening to the haggling, watching fingers count coins like prayers. You remember thinking that salt was magic, able to turn rot into something edible, to hold back the march of time, to trick hunger into feeling something like fullness. You know better now. Salt is a gatekeeper. It holds flavor hostage. It keeps the poor hovering at the threshold of satisfaction, never quite letting them inside. You taste it in olives. Yes, but never in meat. Not really. Not unless you're lucky. Not unless you find the rind of a sausage tossed into a pile of wilted greens behind the market. Not unless you know the butcher's boy, and he owes you something. The second olive makes your throat tighten, but you swallow it anyway. You've learned not to waste even bitterness. Bitterness has weight. It carries you, even when sweetness is a distant rumor. There's an old man outside the temple today, feeding birds with a handful of something brown and wet. You can't tell if it's bread or boiled barley, but the birds don't care. They peck with frantic joy, their wings beating air into dust. He sees you watching and waves you closer. You hesitate. You've never liked favors. They come with memory, and memory always collects interest. Still, you step forward. He presses something into your hand, a small roll of dates stuffed with something. You can't tell. Maybe pine nuts, maybe crushed herbs. It smells too sweet to be safe. You nod, say nothing, and move on. You pocket it, not because you plan to eat it now, but because it's always better to keep sweetness for later, when your body has something to compare it to. Later, as the sun begins to sag toward the horizon, you stop beneath the archway of a crumbling aqueduct. You take out the last olive. It's the firmest of the three, still shining slightly with that oily sheen that makes it look far more delicious than it ever tastes. You bite, slowly. This one is less bitter, slightly. You chew without emotion, swallow without reflection. The pit stays between your teeth. You hold it there a while, like a memory that hasn't quite settled. You think about the fields, where olives come from the groves that used to hum with life, with laborers, with sun. You've never seen one, but you've heard stories of long rows of trees, gnarled and twisted like old hands, of harvests that smelled like green gold, of presses that squeezed oil so rich it gleamed like melted coin. You wonder if anyone ever wept from eating an olive too fresh. If anyone ever felt so overwhelmed by fullness that they sat down in the dirt and forgot what it meant to be hungry. Probably not. Or maybe they did, and no one wrote it down. You learn that some feelings don't make it into history, only into bodies, and into silence. As the day ends, you return to the same place you started from, the same alley, the same wall, the same slow exhale of a city that never stops pretending to be eternal. You sit, you watch the people pass. And though your belly is not full, it is not entirely empty either. 3 olives, 1 strange date, a crust from yesterday, soaked in vinegar. You don't call it dinner, you don't call it anything, but it is something that lets you sleep without trembling. And that, at least for tonight, is enough. You've grown used to the taste of metal. Not because you like it, no one does, but because there are days when thirst becomes too sharp to ignore. And what the aqueduct delivers is the only option that doesn't cost more than your dignity. The water in Rome moves like blood through the body of the city, flowing from mountains and springs through feats of architecture that are praised in books, yet rarely questioned in practice. And for those who live low enough, low in rank, low in space, low in voice, the water is what you are allowed, not what you choose. You approach the public fountain with your usual caution, eyes scanning for others who might shove or steal. You carry a clay jug with a crack down its side, mended clumsily with tar and hope, and the handle warms slightly in your palm from the press of your own fingers. The queue is short this morning, which is good. Less chance of someone deciding your spot isn't worth respecting. Less time to watch the water bubble over the lip of the basin, shimmering and cold, promising relief it only partially delivers. When it's your turn, you kneel and dip the jug. The stream is steady, clean to the eye, but the smell rises quickly, faintly, metallic, sharp, tinged with the ghost of old pipes and the residue of something you've learned not to name. You pause for a moment, letting the weight of the jug shift in your hand. Then you drink. It hits the tongue with the same taste it always has: iron, stone, and the shadow of something ancient. A taste that reminds you you're drinking not just water, but the compromise of 1,000 decisions made long before you were born. This water has traveled farther than you ever will. It came down from the mountains, filtered through tunnels and clay channels, siphoned across bridges and beneath villas, past the bathhouses and markets, past gardens no one like you has ever stepped inside. And when it finally arrives at your fountain, this chipped marble relic beneath a flaking fresco of Neptune, it no longer carries the cold clarity of the source. It carries the story of the city. And the story isn't kind. Rome gives, but not evenly. It flows, but not purely. The elites, of course, have private cisterns. They sip water from silver goblets, cooled in ceramic pots, strained through cloth and perfumed with mint or citrus or the vague pretense of cleanliness. They talk about water as though it is sacred, as though its clarity reflects their own virtue. You've heard them speak of it in passing, how the aqueduct system is one of the empire's great civilizing feats, how it represents control over nature, over chaos, over thirst itself. You don't say anything when they speak, you just keep drinking. Historians still debate the extent to which lead piping and Roman water infrastructure contributed to chronic illness, especially among the poor. Some argue that the quantities were too small to make a difference. Others point to records of fatigue, muscle weakness, strange behavior, and early death symptoms that, once spoken aloud, sound familiar in your own bones. You wonder, sometimes, what you've swallowed over the years. Not just the metals, but the silence that comes with them, the acceptance, the ritual, the way your tongue has stopped recoiling from that first metallic note, and instead now greets it like an old companion. You drink because you must, and you drink with the understanding that this water, like so much else in your life, was never really meant for you. Today, someone left a sandal near the fountain, not by accident. There's blood on the strap, dried and curling at the edges. You don't look too closely, but your stomach tenses in that way it does when something that should have been private becomes part of the shared street. You've seen it before, a scuffle over position, an insult given by a citizen, received by someone like you, a punishment meted out quickly, casually. The sandal tells enough of the story without needing a witness. You step around it, not because you're afraid, but because you've learned to let certain things lie undisturbed. The water splashes against your wrist as you adjust the jug, and the chill travels up your arm in a narrow current. You exhale slowly, letting your breath fog slightly in the morning air. You wonder if this is what wealth feels like, being able to sip without calculating, to drink without watching, to taste water and only taste water. Probably not. Wealth doesn't drink. It consumes. It expects. It forgets. You remember a day when the fountain ran dry? It had been weeks without proper rain, and the pipes from the hills had been diverted for some civic ceremony. Something about honoring the gods with public games and purified baths. The elite washed themselves in scented pools, while the streets below cracked in thirst. You waited 6 hours for a trickle that never came. In the end, someone climbed the hill, cursed the sky, and came back with 2 amphorae stolen from a private garden. He poured them into a cracked trough for children to fight over. You didn't take any that day. You watched the water spill and thought only of how fast it vanished into the dust. Sometimes, it's not the lack of water that wounds, it's the way it's wasted. The ease with which others spill what you would have worshipped. Today, the fountain flows. That, at least, is something. You fill the jug to the line you've carved on its side, careful not to overburden yourself. Carrying water is more than just transport, it's endurance. The slosh against your hip, the slow fatigue in your forearm, the knowledge that if you trip, you lose not just the water, but the time, the effort, the faith that your day could go quietly. You walk home slowly, keeping your steps small, your breath even. The jug knocks against your side with each movement, and with it comes the whisper of metal against clay, a music you've come to recognize. You pass a vendor selling wine, not the good kind, not even the bad kind, just posca, poured into cracked cups and flavored with whatever herbs were available at the moment. He sees your jug and offers a trade, a cup of wine for half your water. You shake your head, not today. You need the water more than the blur, but still, the offer lingers in your mind, because there are days when the memory of taste is stronger than the logic of survival. Days when a sip of something sour and strange might be enough to remind you that life can still surprise you. Today is not that day, but you feel it coming. Maybe tomorrow, if the bread goes stale early. You return to your alley just as the sun crests the rooftops, casting narrow beams of light that slice through the air like golden knives. The warmth doesn't reach the ground. It never does. But it touches your face for a moment as you step into the shadow of your home. You place the jug carefully beside the fire pit and sit down beside it. Your hands are wet. Your feet ache. Your body hums with the low, constant fatigue of carrying not just the jug, but the unspoken weight of everything it represents. Water, here, is not a blessing. It's a burden you bear for the right to continue, for the right to cook, to clean, to soothe a fever, to soften the edge of hunger, to wash away yesterday's grime so that tomorrow can begin without too much shame. And still, you are grateful for it, even when it tastes like rust, even when it burns your throat, even when you wake in the night certain that it's making you sick. Because thirst, unchecked, is worse than poison. It makes you dream of rivers you'll never see, makes you imagine fountains that heal, that sing, that quench in ways no Roman stone ever could. You close your eyes and drink again, slowly, deliberately, not for satisfaction, not even for relief, just to stay here, one more hour. It begins, as it always does, with sound muffled, rhythmic, unmistakably distant, but impossible to ignore once heard. You recognize the soft clatter of cutlery against ceramic, the sharper clang of a bronze serving tray being shifted slightly off balance, followed by a few dry coughs, a lazy yawn, and the faint, feathered murmur of conversation between those who have already eaten more than they needed. Above you, the villa wakes slowly, without urgency, without fear of shortage or interruption. Their morning meal may not be called a feast by patrician standards, but for someone like you, the scent alone is a kind of torment. Roasted garlic, slightly sweetened wine, and the soft, yeasty perfume of bread still warm from its first slicing. You don't bother moving yet. You've learned not to rush. The trick is in the waiting, not just to avoid suspicion, but because things worth taking don't get thrown away until there's no one else around to witness the waste. The villa sits like a crown above your tenement, its foundation pressing down through layers of brick and neglect, reminding everyone below of where they do not belong. You can almost picture the table up there wide, lacquered, painted with vines and mythic beasts, surrounded by sandals too clean to touch your alley without staining. Sometimes, you wonder if they know, if they hear your footsteps below their tiled floors, if they see your shadow where the light escapes through the narrow gaps between their stones, if they recognize your hunger in the way you pause near the waste chute, pretending to rest, eyes lowered, ears sharpened. They probably do, but it doesn't matter, because recognizing something doesn't mean you'll stop discarding it. There's no formal ritual to the waiting. You crouch against the wall, back pressed to the warm stone where sunlight has dried the morning damp, and you listen for the rhythms to shift. When plates are cleared, voices change lighter, more distracted. A servant hums briefly as she scrapes leftovers into a single bronze bowl. You know her name, though you've never spoken. Her footsteps always fall in threes, followed by a pause, as if she's balancing more than just the tray. Then, the moment arrives. A brief silence, the soft echo of the kitchen door swinging shut, and then the sound you've been waiting for, the sharp, wet impact of something dense striking the stones below. They've tossed the scraps. You move quickly, but without running. Running would invite attention, and attention is an invitation to shame, or worse. You round the corner where the villa's stone wall slouches into neglect, and there, nestled between a broken amphora and a long-dead fig tree, are the remnants of someone else's indulgence. A half loaf of bread, crust blackened, the inner sponge torn out, a smear of lentils hardened against a wooden bowl, a fish spine, stripped nearly clean, but still glistening with faint oil, and unexpectedly a single grape, burst but intact, resting like a bruise against the stone. You kneel. You take the bread first. It's still warm at its center. You break it without ceremony, tear away the burnt edges, and press the softest part to your lips. You chew slowly, not for pleasure, but because the act of chewing gives you a few seconds more of this moment, this rare moment where your hunger isn't screaming. Then the lentils, dried, sticky, faintly bitter. You scrape them into your palm with a bit of bark, careful not to lose any of the paste. They taste of onion and garlic, perhaps cumin, or maybe your mind is inventing flavor, dressing the blandness in the memory of things you've heard described but never tried. The grape you save for last, not because it's the best, but because it's whole. Its skin is torn, the juice sticky against your thumb, but it reminds you just faintly of sweetness. Not enough to satisfy, but enough to remember what sweetness might feel like. There is no shame in eating what others discard. At least, that's what you tell yourself. But the truth is more complicated. You've seen how they look when they catch you. The sneer that isn't quite cruelty, but isn't kindness either. The shrug of someone who imagines generosity in what they've thrown away. The children who laugh when they watch you scrape grease from a broken plate. They've been told stories about people like you. You are their metaphor for failure, a cautionary tale delivered in sandals and hunger. And still, you return, day after day, because the villa throws away enough to keep you standing, because shame doesn't taste as bitter as starvation, because even spoiled honey can still coat the throat, because this is the only version of abundance you've ever been allowed to touch. Historians still debate whether the poor in Rome relied primarily on government grain distributions or on what the wealthy discarded. The annona, the grain dole, was meant to feed the masses, to preserve order, to buy loyalty in the form of calories. But the records are vague. Rations fluctuated, queues stretched for miles, and grain alone does not a meal make. What you remember isn't the distribution line, it's this wall, these scraps, this ritual of waiting, of listening, of moving silently in the shadows of another household's fullness. You think, sometimes, about the dog. It lives near the fountain now, ribs like a map, tail curled under its belly even in sleep. But once, it used to beat you here. It knew the sound of the waist before you did, knew how to snatch bones mid-air, knew how to growl in just the right tone to make you retreat. You hated that dog. Then, one morning, it didn't come. You saw its body 3 days later in the gutter, bloated, legs stiff, flies carving paths along its flank. No one moved it. No one cared. The villa threw scraps that day as usual. You ate them, but you thought of the dog while you chewed, and for once, you didn't finish. Maybe that's what hunger does. It doesn't just strip the body, it teaches you who else is willing to fight for scraps, and who's no longer around to do so. Today, the villa is quiet again. You sit for a while longer, just in case. The breeze carries the smell of citrus and vinegar, maybe a cleaning solution, maybe a dessert. You'll never know, but it curls around your nostrils like a whisper of something better. And then it's gone. You rise slowly, letting the ache settle in your knees, and wipe your fingers against your tunic. You take one last look at the wall, at the spot where the food lands, and you memorize it, because in Rome, even routine is fragile. One day, they may stop tossing leftovers. One day, they may build higher walls. One day, someone else may be faster. So you walk on, not full, but no longer desperate. You carry the warmth of someone else's breakfast in your belly, and that, for now, is enough to carry you into the rest of the day. There are days in Rome when fortune arrives not in coins or loaves or even words, but in silence, in the unexpected stillness of a street that normally hums with bargaining, cursing, and the uneven percussion of sandals on stone. It is on one of those days, just after the noon hour when the sun carves hard lines across every alley and the shadows retreat beneath eaves and carts, that you notice something unusual. No shouts, no chase, no distant clash of plates against pavement, just the sound of flies and the soft scrape of wind dragging grit along the curb. And in that hush, you see it, a fig. Not many would have noticed it, nestled as it is between a cracked tile and the base of a market stall's support beam, half crushed, perhaps dropped in haste or overlooked during a hurried pack-up. Its skin, once taut and proud in purple velvet, has begun to give way to the day's heat, glistening with sweat and dust. But you know what it is, even from a distance. Your stomach recognizes the shape. Sweetness has its own silhouette when you've gone too long without it. You don't lunge. That would draw attention. Instead, you drift toward it with the practiced casualness of someone inspecting nothing in particular, keeping one eye on the fig, one ear on the world, and both hands loose at your sides in case anyone else has seen. No one moves, no one calls. The stall is closed. The street, for once, grants you privacy. You kneel, press your fingers gently around the soft mass, and lift it as though retrieving something sacred. It is warmer than you expected. The sun has begun to ferment it, just slightly. You know the signs: a sour undertone beneath the perfume, the way the skin peels back without resistance, the center already beginning to collapse in on itself, but it is intact enough to be called a fig, and for you, that is more than enough. You could eat it here, crouched beside the closed stall with your back to the world. It would take seconds. The juice would run across your tongue, the seeds would crunch faintly like sand, and for a moment, you might feel something close to gratitude, but you don't. You slip it into your tunic pocket instead, not because you aren't hungry, you are, but because hunger has taught you to value anticipation more than reward. A fig in the belly is gone in a breath. A fig in the pocket is a promise, a possibility. And sometimes, possibility is the only thing that makes the walking easier. You spend the rest of the afternoon with your hand near it, never touching directly, but always aware. It shifts slightly with your movement, reminding you of its presence with each bend of the hip, each lean forward to inspect a crack in the stone, or exchange a nod with another soul navigating the same endless routine. It becomes a rhythm in your day, like breath or thirst, or the silence that hovers after someone fails to answer a question. At one point, a child asks you if you've eaten. He's thin, no older than 10, his tunic torn at the shoulder. He doesn't wait for your reply. No one really asks questions in Rome to hear answers. But something about the moment makes you reach into your pocket, just slightly, just enough to brush your knuckle against the fig's soft skin. You think about giving it to him. You almost do, but then the sound of hooves cracks against the stones at the far end of the street, and both of you look away. By the time you look back, the boy is gone, and the fig remains. There's a place you go sometimes, near the old aqueduct, where the stones are still warm from the day long after the sun has slipped behind the rooftops. You sit there now, in the half-light of a sinking sky, and pull the fig from your pocket. It has changed over the hours, softened further. Its skin now translucent in spots, the scent more forward, almost aggressive in its ripeness. You could throw it away. It wouldn't shock anyone if you did. But you don't. You raise it slowly to your lips, hold it there, and inhale. There is something about that first breath that almost satisfies more than the fruit itself, like breathing in a memory, or a dream you forgot you had permission to revisit. And then, gently, you bite. The sweetness is immediate, intense, and almost unbearable. Your tongue, unused to sugar in such concentration, recoils for half a second before surrendering. The seeds crack softly. The skin melts. The juice runs, warm and sticky, down the side of your hand. You close your eyes and let it happen. For those few seconds, you are not poor. You are not hungry. You are not in Rome. You are simply a person with a fig. And that, in this moment, feels like the most miraculous transformation of all. Historians still debate whether figs were truly accessible to the lower classes in Rome. Some argue they were cultivated in abundance and available cheaply in the market. Others claim they were hoarded by the elite, celebrated in poetry, and offered only as symbols of leisure and refinement. The truth, as always, lives somewhere in between. You've seen figs in the hands of senators and slaves. You've watched them rot in baskets outside temples, ignored until the juice stained the marble and the priests waved for them to be swept away. You've also seen children beaten for trying to steal them, their hands slapped red, their cries ignored. A fig can be many things. Today, it was yours. You lick the juice from your fingers, one knuckle at a time, careful not to waste a drop. The sun has nearly vanished now. The aqueduct arches above you like the ribs of something ancient and asleep. The world exhales around you. You feel full, not in the way food fills, but in the way memory does. You know that tomorrow will come with its usual hunger, its dry bread and soured lentils, its vinegar-soaked grains and sharp-tongued vendors. But tonight, you ate sweetness. Tonight, something ripe and round and undeserved sat in your pocket like a secret, and you carried it all the way to dusk without breaking it. That matters. Maybe not to the gods, or the empire, or the men who count grain by the cartload, but it matters to you. And when the night stretches long and you lie again on your straw mat, pressing your back to a wall that doesn't remember your name, you will remember the fig. Not because it was rare, but because it was enough. The pot was still warm when you found it barely. A battered bronze vessel with dents in its sides, and a rim blackened by years of soot. It had been left on the edge of a communal hearth just outside the tavern kitchens, abandoned like so many other things in this city that overflowed with excess for some and scarceness for the rest. You hadn't gone there expecting to eat. That would have been foolish. But hunger has a way of guiding your steps toward places you might otherwise avoid, alleys that smell of old oil, courtyards where slop buckets are heavier than soup pots, doorways where dogs sleep with open eyes and twitching noses. The tavern behind you, a smoke-stained structure of old brick and worn beams, wasn't one you could afford to enter, not even as a shadow. But the pot was outside, and that made it fair game. You leaned down slowly, testing for heat without touching, and caught the scent before you saw the contents sharp, pungent, unmistakable. Garum, the fermented fish sauce that filled the streets of Rome with its salty sting. A smell so particular it clung to clothing, hair, and breath long after a meal had ended. Most people loved it. A few despised it. But for you, it was never about preference. It was about proximity. Inside the pot, stuck to the bottom in a sticky amber glaze, were the remnants of someone's lunch. Not the whole dish, just the trail it left behind. A few lentils, flattened by the weight of a spoon and cooked to the point of collapse, floated near the rim, and just beneath them, a thin ribbon of garum had dried along the edge, dark and shimmering like old honey. You reached for it without ceremony, dragging your fingertip across the surface, careful not to scrape too hard or make noise. When you brought it to your mouth, the salt hit first, then the sour, then something deeper, almost smoky. It wasn't pleasant, but it was powerful, and that, in its own way, was enough. Garum is a contradiction. Its taste too intense to eat alone. Its smell strong enough to make nobles wrinkle their noses. Yet it remained one of the most prized ingredients in the Roman Empire. It was made from fish mackerel, anchovies, sometimes smaller scraps layered with salt and left to ferment in the sun for weeks, sometimes months. The resulting liquid, filtered through coarse cloth, was bottled, sealed, and traded across provinces like gold. For the wealthy, it was a seasoning. For the poor, it was a reminder. You remember your first true taste of it, not the scrape from a tavern pot, not the leftover smear on a bread crust, but a full drop, warm from the bottle, handed to you by a cook's apprentice who felt sorry for you that day. He had filled a spoon, let it cool, and said nothing as you licked it clean. The flavor was so strong it brought tears to your eyes. You weren't sure if it was gratitude or nausea, but you thanked him with a nod, and he never spoke to you again. Because pity, in Rome, is a currency too dangerous to spend more than once. There is something strange about how your body responds to garum. It doesn't satisfy, not really, but it changes you. It makes everything else taste like more than it is. A mouthful of lentils, dry and flavorless, suddenly becomes a dish worth chewing when a trace of garum has soaked into the edges. Even the burnt side of a barley cake, typically ignored or fed to the street cats, can become edible if it carries just the whisper of fish and salt. So you hunt for it not openly, not greedily, but with the quiet persistence of someone who knows how to spot a jar with a broken seal, or a fishmonger too drunk to lock his storehouse properly. Garum isn't food. It's the illusion of food, a conjuring trick, a magician's smoke that tells your tongue a lie and makes your stomach believe it. And in a life like yours, that illusion matters. Today, after your lucky find near the tavern, you wander the streets with the flavor still thick at the back of your throat. You don't speak. You don't need to. The garum does the talking. It reminds you that you ate something. It lingers like memory too sharp to ignore, too faint to chase. You swallow again, as if you might recapture the taste, but it's already fading, replaced by the dryness that always follows salt. You pass a vendor selling lentils by the scoop, stored in sacks that have been patched so many times, the stitches outnumber the threads. He watches you approach, arms crossed, a twig between his teeth. You don't ask for a handout. You don't even linger. But he says something as you pass. "Fish bones and prayers," he mutters. "That's all you lot eat." You don't respond, not because he's wrong, but because today it was almost true. Sometimes you wonder what garum meant to the people who made it, the workers who stirred the vats, who mashed the fish with bare hands until their skin cracked and their nostrils forgot what fresh air smelled like. Did they ever taste it? Did they ever save a few drops for themselves, hidden in ceramic thimbles, brought home under their tunics like treasure? Probably not. Rome is a city built on labor without reward. You've learned that well enough. You reach the Forum by late afternoon, the sun high and hot, the marble steps too warm to sit on. The wealthy drift past in sandals and silk, their voices light with gossip, their mouths stained faintly from wine and spiced nuts. You find a corner where the shade lingers and crouch there, your back against the cool stone, your hands still tinged with the scent of garum. No one pays you any mind. You're part of the scenery, a figure painted in gray, another layer of the city's silence. A boy nearby drops a small loaf. He curses and bends to retrieve it, but not before you see the smear on its surface dark, glistening, unmistakable. Garum. He doesn't see you watching. He doesn't know what it means. He tears off the end and throws it to the ground, wrinkling his nose at the smell. You wait. Not long. When they've moved on, you reach for it. It's warm, soft inside, the crust crisp from the oven. The smear of sauce is small, just enough to stain your fingers. But when you bite, it flares across your tongue like a memory too strong, too sudden, but real. You eat slowly, wiping your hand on your sleeve, pressing your back more firmly into the stone. The taste won't last. It never does. But for now, it anchors you. Historians still debate whether garum was consumed equally across class lines, or whether its omnipresence in Roman cooking was overstated by those who could afford to record their meals. Some say the poor used cheaper variants, cut with vinegar or diluted with oil. Others claim even the weakest garum was beyond reach for many. existing more as myth than meal. You don't care which version is true. You only know the way it fills your mouth with a feeling you can't name. Not fullness, not pleasure, just recognition, as if, for one moment, the city admits you exist. Not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as someone with taste. As someone who eats. By the time the sun begins its descent, you are walking again. The salt lingers behind your teeth. The heaviness in your stomach is more memory than substance, but you let it carry you forward, through the alleys, past the bakeries, past the shouts of boys chasing dogs, past the smell of figs too far gone to be saved. You pass a broken jar near the fish market, the residue inside clinging to the edges like tar. You consider it, but you keep walking. You've had enough garum for one day. And besides, some days are better remembered than repeated. It begins with a thick, heavy steam that rises in slow curls from a low clay pot perched precariously over shared coals. You know it immediately, not because it's pleasant, but because it is unmistakably familiar. The sour tang of overcooked cabbage, the oily bitterness of wilted leeks, and beneath it all, the quiet green scent of something once living that's now been boiled into surrender. It's a scent you've followed before, not with excitement, but with resignation. It smells like food, or at least the idea of food. And for most of the poor who live in the narrow belly of Rome's alleys, that's enough to draw them close. You linger in the doorway of an acquaintance's cramped lodging, not quite a friend, not quite a stranger, someone who owes you nothing, but owes the world even less. He's not alone. A few others huddle near the fire, some sitting on overturned amphorae, some crouched low with elbows on knees, all watching the pot with a hunger that has nothing to do with greed and everything to do with calculation. They're waiting for it to finish, for the leaves to soften, for the fibers of the leeks to melt into something closer to broth. Not because it will taste good, but because chewing something too long reminds you of how little it gives back. You don't speak. There's no need. The understanding is old and practiced, and wordless. If you bring something to add, you'll be served. If not, you'll wait and hope someone offers what they shouldn't. You didn't come empty-handed, this time, at least. Earlier in the day, you'd traded a scrap of linen, a corner of a robe too far gone to patch, for a handful of greens. Not much, not fresh, but enough. A bunch of leeks, trimmed to their softest centers, slightly yellowed at the ends, wrapped in twine that once held more respectable goods. You'd found the old woman in the market's rear lane, where sellers go to complain rather than trade, and she had looked at you not with sympathy, but with boredom. You weren't the first to ask. You wouldn't be the last. But she'd taken the cloth, sniffed it, shrugged, and handed you the bundle. Now, you draw it out slowly and place it on the bench near the pot. Eyes turned toward you, not with surprise, but with a quiet nod of inclusion. You've paid your way. The man who tends the pot doesn't thank you. He doesn't need to. He simply takes the bundle, separates the stalks, and adds them into the cabbage stew with the grace of someone who knows the price of every leaf. It takes time. Cabbage fights the heat, resists softening, clings to its structure like a soldier defending a crumbling wall. Leeks, more generous, dissolve willingly, giving the broth a faint green hue and a sweetness that rides just behind the bitterness. No one speaks while it simmers. Conversation in moments like these risks spoiling the quiet sense of almost safety that hovers around shared meals. Silence, in a room where food is coming, is a kind of reverence. You find a seat on a stack of folded reeds near the fire. The smoke creeps around your shoulders like a shawl, clinging to your skin, seeping into your hair. It will stay with you for days, That, too, is part of the ritual. When you smell the same on someone else, you know they were fed. Not well, not richly, but enough. The pot bubbles once softly, like a breath, and someone murmurs, almost. You nod, even though no one is looking. You've said it before yourself, when you were the one stirring, when you were the one who had something to give. Almost, not ready, not now, but close enough to keep hoping. When the stew is finally portioned out, it's done with care, not fairness. No one measures, no one counts, but there's an art to the serving. The oldest first, the ones with the cough next, the rest according to who helped the fire last, or who kept watch when a soldier passed by. You receive your share in a small bowl shaped more like a shell than a vessel. There's a chip on one edge that you've learned to drink around. You lift the bowl and breathe it in. It smells stronger than it tastes. The cabbage is soft, almost too soft, but still holds its shape. The leeks are gone, invisible, melted into the broth. The salt is barely there, a memory more than a presence, but your body is grateful for the warmth. You sip, slowly, deliberately, not because you're trying to make it last though, that's true, but because this kind of food tastes best when you pretend it tastes like something else. Historians often describe the diet of Rome's poor in broad terms: grains, vegetables, the occasional scraps of meat, always supplemented by olive oil and vinegar when available. But the truth is harder, more intimate. It's not just what was eaten, it's how it was shared. It's who had the fire that night, whose pot didn't crack, whose courage was strong enough to steal greens from a garden guarded by dogs in desperation. You know someone who lost a finger to a rooftop herb patch, another who was caught taking a single onion from a senator's rear garden and was beaten so badly he forgot words for weeks. Theft, when it comes to food, is not a sin in the eyes of the hungry, it is a prayer offered with shaking hands. Whether the gods answer or not is a matter of luck and noise. The leeks you added today were not stolen. Not exactly, but they were close enough. You don't regret it. You only wish they had been fresher. As you finish your bowl, someone beside you begins to hum. It's not a song you know. Perhaps it's not a song at all, just a pattern of sound, rising and falling like the steam from the pot, wrapping itself around the final moments of eating. It makes the food feel heavier, more real. You find yourself tapping your fingers against your knee in time with the rhythm. There is something holy about this kind of gathering. Not in the religious sense. There are no gods here, only mouths, but in the way silence can be kept. Not out of fear, but out of mutual respect. Everyone here knows what it means to eat this way. Everyone here has felt the hunger that comes when you miss even one night's stew. When the pot is scraped clean and the bowls are rinsed with the thinnest dribble of water, the room begins to empty. No goodbyes, no promises, just bodies rising, bones creaking, and the quiet acknowledgement that tomorrow may not be so kind. You stay seated for the while longer, letting the warmth settle in your belly, letting your limbs grow heavy. Hunger doesn't vanish, not entirely, but it softens for a time. That, more than anything, is what you've learned to chase the softening. Not fullness, just a lull. You stand and stretch slowly, your back resisting at first, then yielding with a pop that makes the man nearest to you wince in sympathy. You nod, he nods back. That's enough. You leave the room and step out into the fading light, where the scent of cabbage still clings to your skin, and the smoke from the fire has woven itself into your tunic. The street is quieter now. Evening has started its slow descent. You walk toward nowhere in particular, hands empty, stomach calm, thoughts drifting. The world feels less sharp when you've been fed, even poorly. The corners blur, The sounds dull. The weight of walking doesn't press as hard on your knees. You glance at the garden wall 3 streets over, the one with the lemon tree just barely visible above the bricks. You've never taken anything from it. Not yet. But you know the nights are growing colder, and the stew won't always wait. And sometimes, the only way forward is through a gate you were never invited to pass. Bread should rise. That's the first lesson taught not by a baker or a parent, but by time itself, by observation, by the slow revelation that some loaves swell while others remain dense, heavy, and sullen. For the poor in Rome, rising bread isn't a guarantee. It's a kind of luxury. Flour, water, and heat may be the visible ingredients, but behind every successful loaf lies something more elusive: fermentation, patience, and often something you were never supposed to have: yeast. Or, if you can't afford yeast, something that merely pretends to be alive. That's where the ash comes in. You learned the trick from a boy who had lived in 5 households and been claimed by none. His hands were always black with soot, his sleeves stiff with old flour, his eyes darting constantly, as though he expected the sky to fall in on him at any moment. He taught you how to kneel by the hearths after they'd gone cold, sifting carefully through the gray for the softest, finest ash, what he called warm ghosts. It wasn't just burnt wood you wanted. It had to be the ash from certain kinds of fires: olive pit, grapevine, fig branches, things that once held flavor and, maybe, still did. Mixed into dough, these ashes didn't create true leavening, not really, but sometimes, if the air was humid and the dough left long enough, bubbles would form, tiny, scattered, just enough to make the bread slightly less dense, slightly less like a stone in your stomach. You called it ash bread with a grin, as though the name gave it identity, even nobility, as though calling it something could trick the body into believing it was more than survival. This morning, you make it again, not because it works every time, but because it's better than making nothing. You've managed to gather a small pile of barley flour, ground coarse and uneven by an old woman near the Temple district who still operates a hand mill out of habit. It's not enough for a feast, not even enough to share, but you aren't thinking of sharing today. The chill has crept deeper into your joints than usual. The air smells of distant rain, and sometimes, when the day feels this gray, the thought of making something with your own hands is the only kind of prayer you can afford. You build the dough slowly, first the flour, then a touch of water from the cistern, carried carefully in a cracked jug that leaks if tilted too far. You stir with your fingers, then your palm, kneading against the flat stone floor, letting your weight press down into the mass until it becomes something closer to resistance than paste. Then you reach into your pouch and pull out the ash. It's soft, fine, almost silky between your fingertips. You fold it into the dough without ceremony, feeling the shift in texture, the faint grittiness that ash always brings. It smells faintly of smoke and something sweeter: fig wood, perhaps. A good omen. You shape the dough into a flat disc and leave it near the low warmth of a cooking fire not your own, offering a quiet nod to the man who tends it. He doesn't ask what you've brought. He doesn't need to. Everyone knows the smell of ash bread when it starts to bake: earthy, bitter, faintly sour, but not unpleasant, just real. As it cooks, you sit close, back against a low wall, hands resting across your knees. The bread rises, slightly, enough to crack the surface in 3 places. You smile, not because it looks beautiful, but because it doesn't look like failure. When it's done, you lift it carefully. The underside is scorched, the top dry, the edges crumbling already, but it holds its shape. You tear it in half. Steam escapes, carrying with it the ghost of every meal you've ever hoped to eat. You take a bite. It crunches first, then gives way to chew. There's no flavor, only the illusion of warmth and the comfort of motion. Still, you chew slowly, letting your body pretend this is something closer to nourishment. You remember what the boy used to say, the one who taught you, it's not bread, it's hope disguised as dough. He was beaten once for stealing flour. The magistrate said the punishment was light, only 5 lashes, but his shoulder never healed right. You haven't seen him since last winter. You eat the second half of the loaf more quickly, the ashes clinging to your tongue, and wish you'd told him thank you. Historians occasionally reference poor quality breads in their accounts of lower-class Roman diets. They mention husk-filled loaves, chalk-dusted flour, and barley paste pressed into flat shapes for quick baking. But few mention ash bread, not because it didn't exist, but because it was never written down by those who counted. Ash was not an ingredient. It was a necessity born of desperation, passed hand to hand, whisper to whisper, the kind of recipe that disappears the moment someone finds enough yeast. But in places like this, in alleys and tenements and corners of kitchens that never see the sun, it still lives. Ash bread does not rise like proper loaves. It does not inspire poetry or praise. It does not fill the room with joy, but it stretches a handful of flour into something more than dust. And that, in this city, is a miracle. After eating, you sit a while longer, letting the warmth of the bread linger in your chest. You have no more flour, no more ash, but you have silence and a kind of calm that only comes after hunger quiets. A woman passes carrying 2 baskets, one filled with herbs, the other with pebbles. She's testing for weight, not content, trying to balance them for the long walk across town. She glances at you, sees the crumbs near your mouth, and nods, not in greeting, in recognition. You nod back. No words are spoken, none needed. Later, you pass the old bakery with its brick ovens and curved roof tiles. You know the man who runs it. You've watched him slap loaves into place with an ease born from lineage his father baked. And his father, before that. He uses yeast, olive oil, even honey, sometimes. His bread is soft, golden, fragrant. But he doesn't see you. You never go inside. That door was closed long ago. Still, as you walk past, you wonder not with envy, but with curiosity what it feels like to bake without ash, to not need a trick, to not stretch hope until it snaps. You never resent them, the ones who eat well. You simply do not understand how they forget what it's like to eat just enough to keep breathing. That night, you dream of a hearth you do not know, a wide space filled with glowing embers, smoke rising in soft spirals toward a ceiling high enough to echo. There is bread in the dream, real bread, soft and tall, its crust glowing golden, its center warm, but when you bite, it crumbles to ash in your mouth. You wake not with hunger, but with memory. And sometimes that's worse. If you've made it this far, this quiet rhythm belongs to you now. You can like the video or share this hush with someone else who's still awake. Not all days in Rome begin with dread. Some start with a distant echo of music, tambourines clattering in uneven rhythm, laughter bouncing from window to window, and the trill of a wooden flute that rises above the noise like a bird startled into the sky. These mornings come with color. Ribbons strewn across alley doors, laurel woven into hair, children dragging fruit skins across the pavement, their fingers sticky, their faces smeared with sugar and soot. You do not wake hungry, exactly not because the hunger has passed, but because it has been muffled by the promise of something different. Festival days, though rare, shift the air. For the poor, they do not offer invitation. only opportunity. You are not meant to attend the feast, only to witness its shadow. Still, you get up faster than usual, tug on your tunic, and step outside without pausing to count what you don't have. The streets are already slick with waste. Grape skins squashed into purple smears, pomegranate rinds flung onto walls and then forgotten, honey streaked down banisters and doorposts, hardened now in the sun like amber-colored scars. Somewhere nearby, a man sings with wine in his throat, while another urinates against a statue's base. In a few hours, the celebration will dull into sleep, but right now, Rome is loud, swollen with the illusion of generosity. You've learned that the best time to scavenge is not at the height of the feast, but just after. When fingers are too full to hold on to what matters. When platters are tipped, not out of malice, but out of indulgent clumsiness. When nobles pretend to share by throwing dates to their slaves and letting the rejects tumble down the marble steps. You station yourself near the temple stairs just outside the line of sight, but close enough to hear the coins falling into donation bowls and to see the priests bite into honey cakes laced with fennel. One, younger than the rest, flicks the remaining half of his dessert toward a passing dog. The dog misses. You do not. It lands beside your foot, flattened on one side, the edges beginning to harden. You crouch without looking up, scoop it into your sleeve, and walk away. You know better than to eat it immediately. Sticky things draw eyes, and in a crowd this thick, attention is dangerous. Instead, you weave through the narrow lanes toward the south quarter, where the buildings lean over the road like tired shoulders, and the stones stay cool even in afternoon sun. You find a patch of shade behind a stairwell and sit. Then, and only then, you unwrap the honey cake. It's sweeter than anything you've tasted in months. The exterior is stiff, but the inside still clings together in a way that speaks of butter, or something close to it. There are seeds embedded in the surface, maybe poppy, maybe something harder. You don't care. The honey dominates, sticky and slow, and even though the cake crumbles as you lift it to your mouth, you hold it together with both hands, careful not to lose a single bite to the dust. The sweetness is startling, almost violent. Your teeth ache from it. Your lips glue together between chews. Your stomach clenches slightly in protest, unaccustomed to such richness. But you don't stop. You eat until it's gone. Then you lick your fingers, then the inside of your wrist, then the bit of sleeve that caught the drippings. Only then do you let yourself exhale. Spoiled honey isn't truly spoiled. Not in the way meat spoils, or milk turns. It simply thickens, darkens, sharpens. The sweetness grows bolder, less polite. Some Romans say that aged honey is more valuable, more potent. Others discard it when the edges begin to taste like smoke. For the poor, there's no debate. Spoiled honey is still honey, just as a broken amphora is still a bowl, just as a half-burnt loaf is still bread. The line between edible and inedible is always thinner than the rich would believe. You've eaten honey that made your throat tighten. You've spooned it over bread so hard it cracked your tooth, just to give the illusion of softness. You once watched a woman boil spoiled honey with vinegar and drink it like wine. She called it a tonic. She died 2 days later. But you still remember the look on her face as she drank, eyes closed, mouth relaxed, as though the sweetness had transported her somewhere far away from the damp bricks and the coughing child and the man who shouted from the stairs every night. Maybe she knew what it was. Maybe she drank it anyway. Maybe sweetness is worth the risk. Later, as the sun dips and the city begins to groan under its own weight, you find your way back toward the central square. The crowds have thinned. Bits of bunting drift across the cobblestones like forgotten birds. The wine has mostly dried, and the tables, those wide tables laid with silver and dates and roast meats and wreaths, are being cleared by silent hands who move without urgency or expression. You know the drill. You approach with your shoulders low, your pace even. Not a threat, not a beggar, just another pair of hands, willing to help, if not asked too many questions. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the scraps are offered. Other times, they're left in piles for the dogs or swept into the gutter. Tonight, they are heaped near the back alley behind a senator's townhouse, trays of broken nuts, fruit peels, pieces of flatbread soaked in oil. You kneel, scan quickly, and find something unexpected, a half-spoonful of what looks like pine nut paste, still clinging to the side of a cracked platter. You taste it with one finger. It's sweet, but not just sweet. There's spice in it, cinnamon, maybe, and something softer underneath, like goat's milk or cheese. You know this flavor from rumor, from stories told between those who've worked kitchens they were never allowed to eat from. It's called moridum, a spread reserved for festival tables, made from crushed herbs, nuts, and sweet curd. You never thought you'd try it. And here it is, on the side of a broken plate. You scrape what you can and press it onto a shred of bread. It melts, and for a moment, you forget where you are. Historians write of Roman feasts in language so lavish it becomes absurd, of 10-course dinners, and plates of gilded songbirds, of honey-drizzled dormice and cakes carved like gods. But they rarely mention what was swept away, what was left behind, what was dropped by drunk guests or ignored by children too full to finish. The remains of a celebration are as revealing as the feast itself. They tell you who was allowed to taste joy and who had to steal it. They show what was valued and what wasn't even noticed as it vanished. You sit beneath the arch of an old bathhouse, still chewing the crusts you saved from earlier, wiping the oil from your palms with a rag you tore from an old tunic. The taste lingers longer than you expect. Not just the sweetness, but the sharpness underneath the feeling of having eaten something you were never meant to touch. It's not guilt, not pride either. It's closer to defiance. Quiet, private, unspoken. Tonight, you will sleep with sugar on your breath. That will not happen again for a long time. But it happened once, and that is enough. The fish market is quieter than usual this morning, though the smell still arrives well before you do, strong, inescapable, clinging to the air like wet wool. It's a scent that sinks deep into stone and skin, a mixture of brine, scales, blood, and seawater that never quite washes off. No matter how hard you scrub, you don't mind it anymore. You've stopped wishing for sweet-smelling corners in this city. The reek of fish is not pleasant, but it is honest, and more often than not, it signals the possibility of food. You wait until the vendors have begun packing up, the best parts long gone, sold or bartered or sliced thin and whisked away on polished trays to houses with courtyards and tiled fountains. What's left behind are the remnants' heads with cloudy eyes, tails curled stiff with cold, and bones stripped bare but still shining with oil. These aren't considered waste. Not exactly. Some of them will be used to flavor stew, to create broth, to feed dogs. But there are enough pieces no one wants, and that is your window. You know where to stand. Not too close, lest someone decide to chase you off. Not too far, lest someone else get there first. You hover at the edge of the stall where the fishmonger's apprentice is scraping scales into a wooden box. He's young, distracted, irritated. When he turns his back to adjust a basket, you reach down and pull two small heads from the discard pile. One is from a mullet, the other unidentifiable. Both are intact enough to be useful. You wrap them in a piece of cloth and walk away without a word. You've done this before, many times, And each time, there's a method to it. You don't boil the fish heads right away. Instead, you carry them through the city, letting their dampness cool against your hip, searching for a fire you can use without owing too much for the privilege. Eventually, you find a shared hearth near the back wall of a collapsed warehouse where a few others have gathered. A pot is already suspended over the embers, filled with water so thin it might as well be air. A woman is stirring it with a reed, humming under her breath. She glances up when you approach, sees the bundle, and nods once. You've offered fish before, she remembers. You hand her the cloth. She unwraps it, inspects the heads with practiced indifference, and drops them into the pot without comment. They disappear beneath the surface with a sound softer than breath. She resumes stirring. The broth will take time. It always does. The heat must coax out what little remains, oil clinging to the bones, fat around the gills, slivers of flesh tucked behind the cheeks. You've learned that if you're patient, the water will turn cloudy, then silvery, then a kind of pale gold that shimmers if held to the light. It won't taste rich, not like the stews the wealthy make with whole fillets and herbs, but it will taste like something, like the sea, like nourishment, like effort. While it simmers, you sit beside the hearth, careful not to shift your legs too close to the embers. Others join you: an old man with no shoes, a girl with a woven basket of empty shells, a boy who smells of urine and mint leaves. No one speaks. There is no need. The presence of the pot unites you. The understanding that something is being made, something shared, builds a kind of silence that feels heavier than speech. You watch the steam rise. You let it drift across your face. And you wait. When it's ready, the woman ladles it out using a cup made from half a gourd. Each person gets one measure, small, but hot, and surprisingly aromatic. You cup your hands around yours and sip slowly. The broth tastes of salt, of course, and the faint metallic tang of bone. But it also carries something smoother, something rounder. The fat from behind the eyes, perhaps, the marrow from the jaws. It's not filling, not truly, but it settles your stomach in a way that dry bread never does. You drink every drop, then lick the rim of the cup. Nothing is wasted. When the pot is nearly empty, the woman reaches in with a carved spoon and retrieves what remains of the head's gill plates, small bones, soft scraps of flesh. She divides them without ceremony. You receive a cheek, half a tongue, a piece of skin so thin it curls like parchment. You chew slowly, not because it's tender, it isn't, but because chewing gives you the illusion of choice. Fish heads are not glamorous. They are not coveted. They are not described in literature or offered in temples, but they feed. They have always fed, in Rome, where the divide between feast and famine is measured in door frames and sandals. Fish heads are one of the few things that remind you the city still contains kindness, even if it's accidental. Historians write about garum, about luxurious fish sauces shipped in clay amphorae from the coastlines of Hispania and North Africa, about the spiced, roasted, salted seafoods that adorn the tables of senators and poets. They do not write about the heads left in the gutters, the bones swept into corners, the slivers of flesh cooked over open fires by people who never learned to read or write but knew how to survive. You think often of the waste that feeds the world, of how the rich throw away flavor without realizing it, of how you've built a life from their leavings. After the meal, you help rinse the pot with water scooped from a basin that smells of clay and moss. You do it not because you are asked, but because contribution is its own kind of currency. As you scrub the sides with a reed brush, you find a thin line of fish oil congealed near the bottom. You run your thumb across it, then press the finger to your tongue. It's sharp, a little bitter, but good. You nod to the woman. She nods back. The pot is clean. The fire is fading. You rise and move on. Later that evening, walking back through the slums toward your shared alcove, you carry the memory of the broth with you, not as satisfaction, not as fullness, but as proof. That today, you ate something real. That today, something you found became something you shared. That today, a fish head, a thing cast off, ignored, unloved, was transformed into sustenance. And more than that, it became a moment. Not a grand one, not even a memorable one by most standards, but one where you were warm, one where you belonged, one where you didn't have to ask. At night, lying in your usual corner, with the wall pressing cool against your back and your knees tucked into the folds of your tunic, you think about the sea. Not the real sea, you've never seen it, but the idea of it, the vastness, the salt, the endless motion. You wonder if the fish you ate today came from far away, if it was caught by a man who sang to himself in a dialect you've never heard, if it swam in water so clear it reflected the stars, if it was alive when you were hungry and dead when you were not. You imagine it glowing, just under the surface, darting left, then right, then gone. And then you sleep. There's a moment, just before dusk, when the wind softens and the sounds of the city stretch out long and thin, like shadows cast from tall colonnades. It's the hour when work begins to fold into itself, when stall keepers cover their tables with worn cloth, and the animals tethered to carts grunt with relief. In the quarters where Rome forgets to look, this is the time when hunger gathers momentum. Not in desperation. Desperation has already passed, but in the steady convergence of those who carry pots instead of coin, who follow the scent of lentils thickening over a fire that isn't theirs. You don't always know who starts the cooking. Sometimes it's a mother with a cloth of grain and nothing to season it. Other times, a man with more fuel than appetite offers the fire. Tonight, it is a boy 15, maybe 16, who sits cross-legged before a pot no bigger than a helmet, steam drifting lazily from its rim. He doesn't guard it, doesn't wave others away. He simply stirs. The smell is modest, earthy, lentils, clearly, boiled with patience and maybe a bone from somewhere, maybe not. You follow your feet toward it like a moth to warmth, knowing the rules without being told. Bring something, even if it's only time. Say nothing that demands reply. Eat slowly. Leave before silence becomes awkward. You sit down across from him. He looks up, briefly, then continues stirring. Your contribution is a few wilted herbs folded in a square of cloth fennel fronds, mostly, and 2 bruised celery leaves. You place them beside him without ceremony. He nods once, lifts the lid, drops them in. No thanks is needed. The pot bubbles with the quiet rhythm of something that's not quite enough for anyone, but just enough for everyone. Others arrive as the light thins, an old woman carrying a cracked wooden spoon she refuses to let anyone else touch. A child holding a bundle of dry moss, which she offers as fuel. 2 men, silent and hunched, who sit back to back and share a single cup of water. None of you are related. None of you have reason to trust each other. But hunger, when softened by heat, becomes a kind of glue. You watch the boy ladle out the soup. The portions are not measured by volume, but by gaze. He studies each face before deciding how much they need, how much the pot can afford. When it's your turn, he gives you a scoop thick with lentils, and you accept it with both hands wrapped around the clay bowl he provides. It's hot enough to sting your palms, and it smells of something very close to care. You sip it slowly, not because you're cautious, but because this is the kind of food that demands respect. The lentils are overcooked in places, still firm in others. There's no salt, no oil. The broth is thin, But none of that matters, because the warmth reaches past your throat into the pit of your belly. And for the first time in hours, you feel something resembling peace. Around you, no one talks. A few sigh. One of the men hums under his breath. The old woman dips her spoon into her bowl with the precision of a priest. The child with the moss eats with both hands and lets the juice run down her chin. It's not beautiful. It's not poetic. It's honest. Historians often note that lentils were a staple among the lower classes, cited in lists of grains and legumes handed out in state rations or sold in the poorest corners of the forum. But what they rarely mention is how many hands a single pod of lentils passed through before it became food, how many fingers sorted the stones from the seeds, how many backs bent over the fire, how many voices fell silent as the first bubble rose to the surface. Lentils are not simply sustenance. They are ritual, a ceremony of waiting, of watching. They remind you that time and patience can conjure flavor even when flavor itself is absent. You remember once seeing a mosaic in the atrium of a patrician's house, colors arranged to show a banquet scene. All platters and peacocks, figs and loaves stacked high. In the corner, barely visible, was a small bowl, brown, unassuming, forgotten. You recognized it at once. Lentils, a footnote in stone. The artist included it perhaps out of completeness, perhaps by accident. You never forgot it. That's what lentils are in this city, always present, never praised. And yet tonight, they are enough. You finish your bowl, not quickly, but deliberately, tilting it at the end to catch the last drops of broth. The heat has faded, but your hands remember it. Your stomach does too. You place the bowl beside the fire and do not ask for more. There won't be more. Not tonight. And asking would break the silence. And the silence is the most sacred part of this gathering. One by one, the others begin to leave. The child first, skipping down the alley with the moss bundle now empty. The men nod at no one in particular and vanish into the dark. The old woman sits a while longer, then rises with a grunt and disappears. You remain, not because you need to, but because some fires deserve company after the meal is done. The boy finally looks at you. His eyes are the color of unwashed slate. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't frown either. He just waits, the ladle in his lap now, the pot scraped clean. "Did you ever add garlic?" you ask quietly, your first words all evening. He shakes his head, "Didn't have any." You nod, still tasted like it wanted to. He huffs, a breath that could be laughter. Then he begins to pour water into the pot, scrubbing it with a brush made from twigs. You help without offering. You don't need thanks. The work is the thanks. When the fire burns low and the pot is clean and the coals turn to ash, you leave. The streets have cooled. The scent of lentils lingers on your sleeve. Your steps are lighter than they were this morning. Not because you are full, but because you are not alone. You shared something. It wasn't much. It wasn't meant to last. But for 1 hour, maybe 2, you lived in a circle of hands and breath and warmth. And no one asked you for more than you had. You think that may be what people mean when they speak of enough. Not satisfaction, not luxury, just enough. To sleep, to rise, to try again. And as the city exhales behind you, its windows flickering with stories you'll never enter, you clutch the memory of lentils in your chest like a secret. There are parts of Rome where the sun barely touches the ground. Not because the sky is hidden, or because the day has ended, but because the buildings lean so tightly together that light is filtered through slats and stones, reduced to a kind of dull glow that seems more imagined than real. These are not the spaces where processions pass or where senators pause to be seen. These are the edges of streets, of walls, of the city's own memory. And it is here, behind a temple dedicated to a minor goddess whose name you never learned, that you find yourself today, seated on a patch of dust beneath a column whose carvings have long since faded. You don't sit here for quiet. Rome is never truly quiet, even in its forgotten corners. The city murmurs to itself, footsteps echoing through alleys, laundry snapping from windows, merchants grumbling over spoiled dates. You sit here because no one watches, and when no one watches, you can eat. What you have today isn't a meal. It's a collection of moments, fragments of food, gathered over the course of a long morning spent walking in circles. A hardened crust of barley bread, 2 bites of dried apple softened in your pocket's heat, and a handful of lentils pressed into your palm by a stranger with no name and eyes that refuse to meet yours. None of it is fresh. None of it is enough. But laid out on the corner of your tunic, arranged carefully between the shadows, it begins to resemble something close to care. You chew the bread first. It breaks reluctantly, shards catching in your molars. You've learned to chew on one side, only the other cracked last winter. And there's no coin for the man with the pliers. The taste is flat, but familiar. There's a comfort in repetition, even when it hurts. The apple follows, sweetness, when it arrives like this abrupt, without announcement, always startles. You expect sourness, mold, but instead, there is something faintly fragrant, a memory of orchards you've never seen, of harvests that were someone else's blessing. It is soft enough to fold between your teeth, and for a moment, you let it sit on your tongue without swallowing, as if it might tell you something. The lentils are last, raw, dry, almost tasteless. They crunch more than they should. You know it isn't good to eat them like this. They swell in the stomach and make it ache. But the ache is distant hours from now, and you've made peace with the idea that pain can be delayed, like any other luxury. When the food is gone, you brush the crumbs into the folds of your tunic, not out of embarrassment, but out of habit. Crumbs attract birds, and birds attract people, and people, in these corners, are not always kind. There is a kind of freedom in eating alone, though it took you years to recognize it. In crowded rooms, even among the poor, food becomes performance. You must eat at a certain pace. You must not eat too quickly or too slowly. You must not appear greedy or delicate. You must show neither shame nor satisfaction. Every gesture is interpreted, weighed, even silence speaks. But here, in the shadow of a temple that no longer hears prayers, you are free to eat like the forgotten, quickly when you must, slowly when you can, with your fingers, without apology. Historians sometimes describe Roman meals as moments of social harmony gatherings that reinforced status and community. Even among the lower classes, they point to communal dining spaces, to the design of kitchens, to the rituals of shared bread. But they rarely describe what it means to eat alone, behind walls no one else wants to look at, to chew quietly, not because you seek peace, but because any sound might attract someone who believes they deserve what you have. They do not mention the moments when a man eats a rotten pear behind a cistern because it is the only place he feels safe. They do not speak of a girl who hides beneath a wagon to drink sour milk in secret because the last time she was seen with food, someone called her a thief. The solitude of hunger is not dignified. It is not noble, but it is real, and it is yours. The stone behind your back is cold, but your legs are warm from sitting, the fabric of your tunic damp where the ground has held the morning's dew. A bird clucks from the temple's archway, pacing, searching for something edible in the cracks of the floor. You consider tossing it a crust, but you don't. There won't be another until tomorrow. Maybe later. And even birds must learn that nothing comes easy here. You close your eyes, not to rest, but to soften the edges of the world. You're not tired, not in body, at least, but there's a weariness that lives behind your ribs, coiled and waiting. It doesn't come from walking, or lifting, or stretching. It comes from looking, from watching everyone else live as though the city were designed for them, as though the statues actually listened, as though the gods were real, and food grew from belief. A boy passes, humming. He doesn't see you at first, or pretends not to. He carries a small basket, mostly empty, but not entirely. As he passes the shadow where you sit, he slows, just slightly. Then he places something on the edge of the temple's broken step, a twist of cloth. He does not look at you. You wait until he is gone. Then you stand, walk to the step, and unfold it. Inside 3 olives, glossy with oil and speckled with ash. You eat them standing, not because there is no place to sit, but because something in your chest has shifted some small pulse of recognition that unsettles the weight you had learned to carry. The first olive is bitter. The second is softer. The third has no pit. You swallow them all. Then, slowly, you sit again, this time a little closer to the step. You do not expect more, but you understand now that sometimes food finds you not as a gift, not as an act of mercy, but as a reminder that you are still seen, even in the shadows. By the time the winds shift and the rooftops wear frost like brittle crowns, oil becomes something closer to memory than possession. In summer, you might see it on the surface of every pot and pan glistening, fragrant, warming the bread, thickening the stews. In summer, olive oil drips carelessly from fingers and lamps, stored in dark amphorae and sold in measures so small you wonder whether the weight of the jug was worth the price. But in winter, it vanishes. Or perhaps it simply hides, curling itself into corners of the city you can't reach. In these months, even the scent of it sharp, green, slightly bitter feels like something dreamt. You sit huddled in the narrow hollow between 2 crumbling walls, wrapped in a tunic that has lost more threads than it keeps. The wind slices through the city's bones, turning every archway into a funnel of cold. You press your back to the stones and keep your hands inside your sleeves, palms curled toward each other in the hope they might learn to warm themselves. Your stomach doesn't growl anymore. It gave up a few hours ago, deciding silence was simpler than disappointment. From across the alley, a woman lights a lamp. The flame flickers briefly, struggling to catch, but then steadies. You can't see her face, only the movement of her hand as she adjusts the wick. The oil is faintly visible in the glass bowl, thin, amber, glowing faintly with the heat of use. You watch it like a beggar watches coins, like a man drowning might watch the moon. You aren't envious exactly, but you remember what it is to touch something that warm. Later, you find your way to the rear of a bakery that hasn't opened in 3 days. The shutters are drawn, the door is barred, but behind the building, past the woodpile and the discarded jugs, lies a small refuse pit where old supplies are sometimes cast. You dig carefully without urgency, without noise. Your fingers find cloth, then splintered wood, then, at last, something smooth and curved, a jar, clay, cracked, still sealed with wax. You lift it from the muck and hold it to your chest. You don't believe in miracles, not anymore. But this feels close. You don't open it there. You carry it back to your corner, your hidden place behind the cistern wall, where the wind whistles but does not bite. You break the wax slowly, using a splinter from the firewood stack. The scent that escapes is faint, distant, but unmistakable olives, pressed long ago, their flavor sleeping in shadow. The oil has congealed slightly with the cold. It moves sluggishly, reluctant, but it moves. You dip one finger in. It coats your skin like a whisper. You taste it. It is sharp, bitter at the edges, but soft at its center, like something that hasn't decided whether to comfort or scold. You swallow and feel it spread down your throat, not in fullness, but in texture, a silkiness that tricks your body into thinking it has eaten. You dip again, not because you're still hungry, though you are, but because this oil is not just food. It is proof that the city has not yet forgotten how to offer softness. There are ways to use it. Of course, you could soak a crust of bread in it if you had bread. You could mix it with herbs to flavor lentils if you had lentils. You could share it with someone if you trusted someone enough to let them see what you have. But tonight, you do none of these things. Tonight, you dip one finger again and again, lifting a single drop each time, pressing it to your lips like an offering, as if the act of touching something that rich might change your own worth. You coat the inside of your mouth with silence, and for a time, the cold recedes. Historians often mention the centrality of olive oil in Roman life, its role in lighting, cooking, bathing, even ritual. They document its trade routes, its prices, its storage in great dolia that line the ports and villas, but they seldom pause to consider what it means to crave it when you have none, to know it only by scent, or by memory, or by the trace it leaves on someone else's hands. You've watched nobles press a cloth to their faces soaked in perfumed oil to block the smell of the poor. You've seen oil lamps lit in brothels and temples, in bakeries and bathhouses, flames burning, with a steadiness you could never afford. And here you are, hidden in the stone ribs of the city, clutching a cracked jar like it might offer absolution. It doesn't, but it listens. You wrap the jar again before you sleep, tucking it beneath your tunic, resting it between your ribs and the wall, not for safety, not really, but for warmth. It gives off none, of course. It's just clay and wax and a bit of pressed fruit. But the idea of it, the possession, keeps your breath steady. And in a winter where breath is all you're certain of, that is not nothing. The next day, you wake stiff, but not aching. You move slowly, unfolding from your corner like paper from a letter no one read. You stretch your arms toward the light, what little of it reaches your place, and then unwrap the jar. The oil has shifted. It is looser now, warmed by your body through the night. It glows faintly in the new day. You dip your finger once more, and this time, you press it to your lips, and then your forehead, and then the back of your hand. Not in ritual, not in prayer, just because touch has become a rare enough thing that even oil might feel like a gesture. Later, you meet a boy who sells cloth small scraps, sewn into handkerchiefs and apron strings. You offer him a smile. He offers you a piece of bread no larger than a coin. You accept it, not because it's enough, but because you remember the oil. You eat it with care, tearing it slowly, letting it sit on your tongue longer than it deserves. And then you dip it just once, just enough. The bread soaks the drop instantly, darkening at the center. You chew, and for the first time in weeks, you think of summer. You hear the truth before you see it. Whispers curled like smoke between cracked bricks, where words drift slower than footsteps, and faster than hunger. It begins with a merchant muttering beneath his breath, sweeping at a stall where no one's bought anything in days. It's echoed by a girl threading her way through the alleys with a pail too clean to have held anything real. And finally, you hear it clearly, the mice are back. Not just one, not a scurry in the corners, not the timid gnawing you've grown accustomed to in quiet walls, but bold ones, brazen and fat, running across stalls, chewing through sacks, stealing what even the poor hadn't dared to take yet. And some say that's a sign. You follow the thread of rumor through the marketplace, not because you're afraid of mice, but because you're afraid of what they mean. Mice in the granaries, mice in the olive bins, mice in the flour jars, mice where there should be none because the stores are already too empty to shelter them. And if even vermin are growing desperate, what does that make you? The market smells of lies and desperation today. Not rot, because there's nothing left to rot. Just dry things, empty baskets, dust-covered scales, crates turned upside down to make stools, not displays. Still, the vendors call out. They gesture toward goods they don't have, toward piles that are half sawdust or chalk or sand. You pass one man whose pile of lentils is real, but only at the top. Beneath that crust of truth lies something powdered and tasteless. He glares at you when you hesitate too long. You keep walking. At a fig stall, a woman slices dried fruit so thin you can see sunlight through it. She places each piece on a slab of cracked tile, spacing them with care, like each one might fool the eye into thinking it came from a full basket. Behind her, a child with a hollow stomach and quiet eyes watches as you glance down. The woman's voice is cheerful, almost too much so cut from that cloth of performance every seller wears like armor. She says the figs are sweet, preserved in honey, perfect for strength. She doesn't say that the honey is watered down and the figs are old enough to remember a time before your hunger. You nod politely and step away, not because you disbelieve her entirely, but because even lies deserve the dignity of being left untouched. The bread merchant is worse. His loaves are dark and solid, far too solid. You know the trick. Mix ash with grain to stretch the dough. Make it heavier. It looks like more. And no one dares bite into it until the coins are already gone. You tried it once. The taste wasn't the problem. It was the silence afterward, when your stomach refused to call it food, and your tongue refused to forget it. And still, the merchant swears his loaves were blessed by the temple priests. You watch as he rubs ash onto his hands like flour, then dusts his brow as if from honest work. You wonder what God he prays to. At the edge of the market, beneath a half-collapsed awning, sits an old woman who doesn't bother to lie. Her stall is empty. Her face is not. She watches everything, says nothing. Her eyes are the color of cracked walnuts, and her fingers move constantly folding a cloth, tying knots that lead nowhere, twisting something invisible. You don't ask her for food, you ask her for stories, because when bellies are empty, words can be a kind of filling. She tells you that once, during a winter worse than this, mice ran so thick through the grain stores that the priests claimed they were sent by Mars himself, a punishment for impiety, for gluttony, for forgetting to kneel before the hearth. People panicked, burned their altars, starved more. Then, she says, came the boy who trapped one in a jar. He kept it alive for days, feeding it crumbs and ash and tiny drops of water. And on the 7th day, he let it go. And they say the mice vanished afterward, not because of gods or guilt, but because the boy forgave the hunger before anyone else did. You look at her, unsure whether the tale is meant to comfort or condemn. She shrugs, as if it could be both. You return to your corner that evening, with nothing but the taste of dust in your mouth and the shape of stories in your mind. No coins, no crumbs, but you carry something else now, a question you can't quite phrase. What is real, and what is left to believe in? That's the thing about hunger in Rome. It doesn't just live in the belly. It moves up, into the head, the eyes, the way you walk and where you pause. Hunger makes you notice the mouse that runs too slowly. It makes you suspicious of figs that look too sweet. It makes you wonder whether the gods are silent or just tired. And most of all, it makes you watch the lies, not because you want to expose them, but because sometimes you need them to be true. Tonight, You don't eat, but you chew. You chew the memory of lentils you once had, and the myth of a boy who spared a mouse, and the sound of dried figs slicing like glass in the market light. You chew until the ache fades, not because it's gone, but because you found another rhythm beneath it. Even lies, when held gently, can be music. And in that silence, as you lie curled beneath the eaves, you hear scratching. Not distant, not imagined, but near, deliberate, rhythmic. You sit up slowly. From beneath the loose board behind the cistern wall, a small gray shape emerges. A mouse, thin, sharp-nosed, watching you. It doesn't flinch. Neither do you. Instead, you reach into your sleeve and tear a thread from the hem of your tunic. You leave it on the stone beside you, no food, no promise, just a gesture. The mouse sniffs it, drags it back into the dark. And you wonder, for just a moment, if the story was more than a myth. Maybe forgiveness doesn't need to be large to be real. Maybe hunger doesn't always win. There is a stage of hunger that no longer screams. It doesn't twist your stomach into knots or send aching signals up your spine. It doesn't make your hands shake or your vision blur. No, this kind of hunger has passed all those thresholds, and it has settled into something colder, quieter, like a guest who has overstayed and now sits without speaking, eyes fixed on a wall only it can see. It is not a sharp hunger. It is a slow one, steady as water dripping through limestone, hollowing you from the inside out. You wake not with urgency, but with a kind of stillness. Your limbs feel carved from wood. Your back is stiff from the stone. You blink, not because your eyes are dry, but because the day expects it. Your breath is shallow, not from fear or sleep, but because you've learned that deeper breaths only make your ribs creak with emptiness. There is no rush to rise. There is nothing waiting. Only the lesson of the day survive quietly, or not at all. You've stopped searching the same corners twice. The alley behind the bakery gave up its treasures weeks ago. The burnt sugar scent that once clung to the brick has faded beneath the sharper tang of frost and soot. You know which vendors lie best, which ones mean well, and which will take your last coin with a smile. But none of that matters this morning. You have no coin, and your smile has vanished somewhere behind yesterday's sunset. Instead, you move without destination. It's easier that way. Let your feet take you where your hunger once led. Past the butcher's stall, where only bones remain stacked like offerings, bleached and brittle. Past the inn's back gate, where buckets of swill used to overflow, but now hold only water stained with ash. Past the temple steps, where the prayers grow louder as the meals grow thinner. You pause there, but not for worship, only to listen. The priests speak of sacrifice, of purity, of the strength to go without. But they do not speak of the silence hunger leaves behind. They do not speak of the way it teaches the body to move slower, the voice to fall softer, the eyes to lower. You've watched it teach others. The boy who used to laugh as he ran down the street now walks in careful steps, his mouth shut tight even when no one listens. The woman who used to sing while washing linens now hums under her breath so softly the sound disappears as soon as it's born. Even the dogs have learned. Their barking has dulled to a quiet whine. They beg with their eyes now, not their voices. And you, well, you have learned too. You chew slowly, not because the food demands savoring, but because the act itself must last longer than the meal. You chew not to taste, but to delay the return of hunger. You chew like a ritual one that gives your hands something to do, your mouth a reason to move, your mind a place to linger. When there is no flavor, you invent one. You pretend the stale grain is spiced, that the wet crumb is soaked in oil, that the rind you gnaw once belonged to a feast. These are the stories hunger lets you tell yourself, not out loud, never out loud but deep inside, where truth is less urgent than comfort. There was a time, you remember, when meals were loud, even poor ones, laughter between bites, children's voices rising, neighbors trading jokes over shared stew. You remember the clatter of bowls, the steam curling from pots, the snap of crust as it broke in your hands. But that time has drifted somewhere beyond this season. Now, the meals, if they come at all, are taken in silence, in corners, in private, not out of shame, but necessity. There is something sacred in quiet chewing, a respect for the thinness of the moment, a reverence for what little remains. It is a silence that binds. You've shared a crust with a stranger and said nothing. You've passed a handful of lentils to a child without speaking. You've sipped from a shared bowl and looked away, not from embarrassment, but from understanding. Hunger doesn't need words. It has its own language, a glance, a gesture. The way you press your fingers together before offering something, the way your eyes meet only for a moment, and that is enough. You rest at the edge of a fountain where the water still flows, though more slowly now, as if even the aqueducts grow weary. A woman kneels nearby, rinsing greens, wild ones, pulled from roadside cracks, the kind that grow where feet rarely tread. She works with care, separating leaf from root, inspecting each one like a jeweler weighing stones. You don't ask her for any, but she glances up once and leaves a small pile beside the stone. You nod, and that is all. Later, you sit by yourself and chew one leaf at a time, bitter but clean. Your teeth do not thank you, but your stomach does not protest. The act of eating, however small, gives shape to the afternoon, a rhythm, a purpose. The sun moves, shadows stretch. You chew, slowly, quietly, as if the world will notice if you do it too fast. You remember something your mother once said, that to chew slowly is to make the meal longer. But now you realize she didn't mean time, she meant meaning. Hunger strips you down until only your smallest rituals remain. The way you fold your cloth, the way you sit near the warmth of a wall, the way you breathe before biting. These become your tools, your defense, your comfort. You pass a group of children playing a game. Not with toys, they have none, but with words. One describes a feast. The others guess the dish. They laugh not at the truth of it, but at the exaggeration. Roast peacock, one shouts, pointing at a pigeon. Goat's milk cheese, says another, holding a lump of clay. You smile, despite yourself, because even lies can feed something. The smallest girl catches your eye and lifts her pretend spoon. Want some, she whispers. You nod and mime eating. She grins, and the moment passes, but leaves warmth behind. At dusk, you find your way back to your place beneath the arch, worn stone smoothed by countless feet, but still shelter enough from wind and noise. You settle in. No fire, no food, only the oil jar you still carry, and the memory of those greens, and the imagined taste of goat's milk that was really dust. You dip your finger in the jar, not to eat, not really, just to feel it. It is cold again, but familiar. You press it to your lips, then to your throat. The silence deepens, but it no longer feels empty. It feels learned. By now, hunger is not a stranger, it is a teacher. One who has taken everything soft and asked you to keep moving anyway. One who has silenced your complaints, slowed your steps, and taught you how to notice. The curl of steam from another's bowl, the soft snap of stale bread, the way a shared glance can replace 1,000 coins. You have learned not to ask, but you have also learned how to see. And sometimes, in that seeing, you find something that tastes almost like grace. There are moments when the body eats not because it seeks nourishment, but because it must fulfill the gesture of survival. And sometimes, what you bring to your lips is not food in any recognizable sense, but a placeholder for hunger itself. You no longer distinguish between what is edible and what is tolerable, between sustenance and sacrifice. The line has blurred, as it often does in the underbelly of empire, where the margins of life are pressed so thin they begin to tear. Today, the only thing you find is a handful of bitter weeds growing at the edge of a crumbling latrine wall. Their leaves are sharp, unpleasant to the tongue, but they carry no poison that you know of. You chew them with a slow defiance, ignoring the way the taste lingers like metal. The fibers catch in your teeth. Your jaw moves out of duty, not desire. You do not flinch, nor spit it out. Hunger has taught you that disgust is a luxury. Here, you swallow. You move on, scanning the ground like a crow, trained not for shine but for signs of softness. You find a crust no larger than a coin flattened beneath a cartwheel. It is soaked in wine, perhaps spilled from a broken amphora. You pry it loose with a nail and sniff it. Sour, acrid. The scent clings to your nose, but the color is rich, and your stomach makes a low, involuntary sound. You press it to your tongue. It stings. The wine has turned. There's vinegar in it now, and a trace of dust or chalk. You can't tell which. It burns the edges of your mouth, but your teeth close around it anyway. You chew. You do not remember how to stop. Not far away, you meet a boy no older than 10, who offers something in a folded cloth. His eyes dart behind him as if he has stolen it. When he opens the corner of the rag, you see pale flour off-white, but laced with streaks that should not be there. You've seen this before. Chalk, groundstone, sometimes even ash, sifted so finely it pretends to be wheat. You ask him where he got it, and he shrugs. They were giving it away, he says. Said it makes the dough stretch longer. You hand him a piece of your vinegar crust in trade. He takes it, says nothing, and vanishes into the fog of bodies moving through the market. You clutch the cloth. You know this flour will not rise. You know it will not bake. But you also know how to turn it into a paste, with just enough water and heat to make it feel warm in your mouth. Back beneath your arch, you prepare it. You scrape together the soot from a broken lamp wick. Add a few drops of oil, not olive, not anymore, but something heavier, cheaper, and stir until it darkens into something that smells vaguely of earth and fire. You dip your finger into the paste and taste it. It is nothing. It is everything. It is the echo of bread, the ghost of porridge, the memory of meals long faded. You swallow. A neighbor passes and sees what you've made. He doesn't ask for any. He only nods. The way men do when they recognize the shape of someone else's survival. He sits down beside you without a word. His ribs press through his tunic. His fingers are stained red from some work you cannot name. You do not ask. Silence between the hungry is not awkward. It is sacred. He pulls something from his satchel, a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, a sliver of salted fat, hardened at the edges. He slices it with the edge of a broken tile, offers you half. You trade him a fingerful of paste. Neither of you smile, but neither of you weep. This is not a meal, not by any standard known to kitchens or hearths or gods. This is an agreement, a shared moment of refusal, refusal to vanish, refusal to let the silence win. You chew the fat. It is stiff. Your teeth ache against it. But the salt revives something at the back of your throat. a part of you that remembers flavor. You do not name it. Naming would break the spell. You only chew. As night drifts in, someone down the alley begins singing. A woman's voice, cracked at the edges but steady. It's not a song of hope, nor of grief. It's older than that an herb gatherer's chant, perhaps, or a lullaby from a region forgotten even by the census takers. The tune bends and floats, curling through doorways, slipping into corners where only hunger sleeps. You close your eyes and lean against the stone. Your paste is gone. The fat has vanished from your tongue, but the song remains. You listen. Later, you find a strip of bark, thick and fibrous, tucked beside a crumbling cart. You peel a sliver free. It's not meant to be eaten, but you remember someone once told you it keeps the mouth busy. You suck it like a child at a root. The taste is dry and woody, but it gives you something to do with your tongue. You chew it long after its flavor fades, not because you believe in it, but because it believes in you. You try to recall the last time you felt full, not just fed, but full of heat, of laughter, of the feeling that tomorrow would not require bargaining with weeds. You try, but the memory refuses to surface. Perhaps that's better. Some memories only sharpen the present's teeth. Instead, you think of the first time you learned what hunger meant, not the rumble in your belly, but the tightening behind your eyes when you watched someone else eat and didn't hate them for it, only wondered how it felt. That is the truer hunger, the one that asks not, "When will I eat, but will I ever feel human again?" By midnight, the city is quiet, not asleep. Rome never sleeps, but subdued, its noises muffled beneath blankets of stone and ash. You rise and walk through a narrow lane lit only by a flickering oil torch wedged in a wall crack. You pass a man lying on his side, wrapped in a cloak that was once white. He clutches an amphora like a child holds a toy. You do not wake him. His hunger wears a different shape. You pass a doorway where someone has left an offering to the lares, the household gods. A crust of bread, a fig, a bowl of wine. You consider it, but something stops you. Not guilt, not fear, respect. You leave it untouched. Some meals aren't meant to be stolen. Even now, you return to your stone corner and wrap yourself in your tunic. Your jaw is sore, your stomach quiet, but something inside you stirs not pain, not emptiness, just a kind of clarity. What you ate today does not belong on a ledger. It will not be recorded in any census or scroll. It will not pass a Roman's definition of sustenance, but it has become your truth. Wine-soaked crust, chalky flour, bitter weeds, a sliver of fat, a sliver of silence. A meal in every sense but name, and names are overrated. It begins with a gesture, not of offering, nor of expectancy, but of something quieter, something older. You lift the bowl, not because it contains food, but because it doesn't. You hold it to the flickering light like someone might hold a relic or an heirloom, and in this stillness, it becomes both. There is no fire tonight, only the residue of one long since gone cold. The ashes are not even warm. They sit in the center of the stone floor like a memory no one dares sweep away, in case the gods are still watching. You sit cross-legged in front of the circle and place the bowl carefully before you, cupped between your palms. The curve of its clay has gone smooth from years of use, though now that use is mostly symbolic. A bowl once held lentils, then scraps, then water. Tonight, it holds nothing at all, but you treat it with reverence, nonetheless. The others begin to gather, not all at once, and not for ceremony as others might understand it. No incantations, no priests, no incense, just bodies wrapped in cloaks and silence. There is a man missing a tooth and a finger, a woman whose hair is braided with string because she has no comb, two boys who might be brothers, though their eyes have forgotten how to look related, a grandmother with a face like worn parchment. No one speaks as they approach the hearth's edge, as they settle around its absence. There's no need to say anything. The bowl in your lap says enough. It says I'm still here. It says I remember when this held food. It says, maybe, one day, it will again. You do not lead the gathering, but tonight, for reasons you do not fully understand, the bowl has come from your hands. And so you tilt it forward slightly, so they can see its emptiness clearly, not in shame, but in acknowledgement. The fire may be out, the pot long cooled, the bread gone to richer households, but the bowl remains. And so do you. Someone breathes deeply, and it sounds like a prayer, not the kind that reaches temples or altars, but the kind that has no audience, spoken not in Latin, but in breath and bone. You remember the first time you saw someone do this. It was a woman with cracked heels and a limp. She walked to the hearth after a day of begging and sat down with an empty vessel in her lap, not to beg, but to remember, to let her body settle into the shape it used to take after eating. Her shoulders dropped, her spine curved. Her hands held the bowl as though it still carried weight. And as you watched her, you realized it did. The weight wasn't grain, it wasn't broth, it was memory. And maybe that was heavier. Tonight, you mimic that posture. So does the man beside you, and the boys, and the woman with braided string. The bowls are different shapes, or maybe some hold no bowl at all, only their own cupped hands. But the posture is the same. The rhythm of stillness is the same. And so, the ceremony begins. There's a kind of quiet that falls when people gather with nothing to share but presence. No clinking of spoons, no chewing, just breath, the occasional shift of cloth, a foot scratching against stone, someone exhaling through their nose a little too hard. Yet, somehow, the room, or what used to be a room before it lost its roof, feels full. Not of food, not even of hope, but of company. You glance down into your bowl. You think of what you would place inside, if you could. Not feasts, not extravagant stews or roasted meats or plump, steaming loaves. You would place in it one ripe fig, a wedge of soft cheese, not too sharp, a square of honey bread that your mother once made, back when you were small enough to sit under the table and steal crumbs from the floor, and water, cold, clean water with no scent. You imagine the weight of those things. Then you look again. It's still empty, but not less meaningful. The grandmother begins to hum. No words, just a thread of melody that winds through the circle like smoke. Her voice is thin, wobbly, but unwavering. The sound doesn't ask to be followed, but it invites. After a while, the woman with braided string joins her, a second tone that harmonizes by accident. Then one of the boys, the man with the missing tooth, taps his foot against stone, not in time, exactly, but in rhythm. You don't sing, you simply breathe in time with the sound. You let it move through you like warmth. And for a while, the bowl in your lap becomes heavier, not with food, but with sound, with memory, with shared ritual. When the humming fades, it doesn't stop. It just falls back into the silence. No one claps. No one says thank you. There are no congratulations. It wasn't a performance. It was sustenance of a different kind. And now it's your turn. You raise the bowl slightly, not to your mouth, but to your chest. You hold it there, as if it were something sacred. You close your eyes, and quietly, to yourself, you say the words you haven't spoken aloud in months. Let this be enough. You say it once, then again. You're not sure to whom you speak, not to the gods they've eaten well enough, not to the people around you they already understand. You say it to the part of yourself that still measures worth in calories and dignity, the part that still longs for a meal to mean more than a survival tactic. Let this be enough. Someone places a hand on your shoulder. You do not turn. You do not need to. You know it's the man who brought you salt fat days ago. His hand is firm, present. He doesn't speak, doesn't remove the hand quickly, either. He lets it rest long enough for the moment to feel real. And in that gesture, your bowl feels, for one heartbeat, full. Eventually, the others begin to rise. One by one, no one rushes. No one lingers too long. They move like shadows, lifting from stone. The ceremony is over, though it never really began. You lower the bowl gently back into your lap. Run your thumb along the inside edge. It's still whole, not cracked, not chipped. And in a world where things fall apart easily, that matters. You tuck it back into your cloth sack, nestled beside your scraps of wax paper, your bundle of old thread, your folded rag of dried herbs. You keep these things not because they're valuable, but because they remind you of shape, of containment, of memory. As you stand and stretch your stiff legs, you hear someone whisper something behind you. You don't catch the words. Maybe you're not meant to. Maybe that's how the ceremony ends, when someone else begins the next one. You step outside into the chill. The stars are sharper now. The moon has risen. It casts your shadow long and thin across the broken cobblestones. You walk without hurry. There's nowhere to be, and no one expecting you. But your steps are steady, not because you are fed, but because you remembered what it felt like to be human, just long enough. And tomorrow, you will lift the bowl again. Whether for food or memory, it doesn't matter, because lifting it, even empty, is how you keep going. You wake before the street stirs, before the birds begin their rust-colored songs in the cracks of roof tiles, before the temple bells whisper out their morning sigh. You wake not from hunger, not from the cold, not from the dread that usually threads through your bones like water through wool, but from stillness, from a strange, soft absence. And for a moment, you lie there, wondering if you have gone deaf, or perhaps finally crossed some unseen line between survival and release. But no, your breath still fogs in the morning chill. Your joints still ache as you sit up. The world remains. Only something is different. You reach for your satchel with a movement that is muscle memory now. A habit formed not from routine, but from necessity. Your fingers brush the familiar cloth, the corners frayed and folded over and over again, like a prayer whispered too many times. You open it, expecting to find what you always find: nothing, or nearly nothing. But there it is, wrapped carefully in old linen, folded like a sacred item, waiting quietly. A piece of bread you don't understand at first. It's not the crust of a stolen loaf, not a chewed remnant from someone else's feast. It is whole, small, dense, and slightly flattened, the kind a poor woman might make at the edge of night, saving flour scraped from bowls and oil coaxed from the last jar. You touch it as if it might vanish, but it doesn't. Its weight is real, its warmth, faint but present. And you know someone left this for you, not because you begged, not because you traded, not even because you asked, because they remembered you. You hold the bread in both hands, not yet ready to eat. You sit there in your cloak, your knees tucked under your chin, your eyes on that quiet gift. There is no note, no message, no sign, only the bread. But it speaks anyway. It says you are not invisible. It says you have not been forgotten. It says someone sees you still. And in that moment, the bread is more than food. It is memory. It is kindness. It is survival, not just of the body, but of meaning. You don't eat it right away. Instead, you rise. The sun is only beginning to pale the sky behind the rooftops, and the streets are still lined with shadows and silence. You walk with the bread still wrapped in linen, cradled gently, not hidden. If anyone sees you, they might think you've stolen it, but no one questions you. No one stops you. Maybe they see something in your posture, a kind of reverence that makes theft impossible. You return to the place where last night's ceremony unfolded. The ashes are undisturbed, the cold bowl still cradled in its hollow, waiting like a symbol of something unfinished. You kneel beside it, and without a word, unwrap the bread. You break it in half. You place one half in the bowl, carefully, like an offering not to gods, but to memory itself. The other half you hold in your hand, and only then do you take a bite. It is not sweet, not rich. The bread is coarse. Bits of husk catch between your teeth. But it is bread, honest, made by a human hand and left by one who still believes that small acts matter. With each bite, you remember every meal you've endured, the ash-thick loaves, the spoiled oil, the rot-hidden olives, the sour dates, and water that tasted like coins. You remember the hunger that taught you silence, the feast of bones, the fish head stripped down to its soul. You remember the markets of lies, the fig-turned treasure, the moments when a smell alone could make you dizzy with longing. You remember scraping at pots that held only echoes. And this bread, this simple, solid bread is more than all of them, because it was meant for you. You eat slowly, not because you are trying to prolong the moment, though you are, not because your stomach cannot handle the weight of it, though that's true, too, but because you are afraid to finish it, afraid that once it's gone, you will return to the same rhythm of need and nothingness, afraid that the spell of being remembered will vanish with the final crumb. And yet, you know that isn't true, because the bread itself is not the end. It is proof of something larger, something you cannot name, but feel warming your fingers despite the cold. As the sun stretches across the stones, people begin to pass again. Vendors pulling carts, women with baskets tied to their hips, children chasing dogs with stick swords and barefoot glee. One man nods at you, eyes flicking briefly to the half-loaf still resting in the bowl. He doesn't say anything, but he slows, just enough for his presence to be felt. You nod back, and that's enough. You wrap the last bite of your half-loaf and place it in your satchel, not out of stinginess, but out of care. There will be a moment, later, when you'll need it again, not for hunger, perhaps, but for grounding. A tether to remind you that today began differently, that today, the silence spoke. You stand, your knees creak, but your breath is steady. You feel taller, not because of the bread, but because of what it symbolizes. You step into the morning with a clarity that hunger rarely allows, a kind of fullness, not of belly, but of being. Later that day, you will return to the alleys, to the markets, to the places where ash and whispers are bartered like coins. You will hear the same lies spun from empty baskets. You will pass the fig seller and the lentil trader and the priest who says all suffering is divine. And you will walk quietly among them, not resentful, not proud, simply present. Because now you know the difference between being fed and being seen. When night returns, as it always does, you will sit again by the cold hearth. Others may come, some may speak, some may not. But if one of them carries an empty bowl in trembling hands, you will know what to do. You will take the wrapped half from your satchel. You will break it again, and without a word, you will pass the piece to them, not because you owe them, not because they earned it, but because someone once did the same for you. And you remember what that meant. In a city that forgets the names of its poor, in a world that counts bodies, not stories, in a corner where the gods have gone silent and the rich have stopped looking down, you will have given something back. Not much, not enough, but something. And in the dust, the hunger, the silence, that is how you survive. That is how you begin again. With bread, with memory, with the echo of kindness that does not need to be seen to be real. You've walked through hunger tonight, not just of the body, but of memory, of warmth, of dignity worn thin beneath cold stone and morning smoke. You've tasted silence seasoned with hope, and remembered what it means to be seen, even when the bowl is empty. If your eyes are still open, that's all right. You weren't really here for the facts, were you? Let me know if you've ever gone to sleep with only a crust, or if this reminded you of someone you knew. Maybe you came for the hush between moments. Maybe for the echo of footsteps in alleys long forgotten. Or maybe just for this, a quiet place where time no longer hurries, where breath softens, where the stories don't demand attention, where even the poorest meal still matters, because it was yours. Let the night close in now, not with fear, but with gentleness. The street is quiet, the hearth is cold, but the bowl remains, and that is enough. So take one last breath with me. Feel the weight lift, just a little. You don't need to carry the whole world tonight, just this one story. You've walked far enough for now. Let the floorboards hold the rest. And if you're still awake, was it a little easier this time? Good night from the silent history, where the forgotten are remembered and sleep slowly finds its way back.